Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 6:30, and I will call to order this regular meeting of the Keene Zoning Board of Adjustment. This meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel and the city website. The video is also posted on the city website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the homepage and subscribe to the city meetings email list. The public and other board members will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Anyone who wishes to address the board is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room, table's there, and identify yourself by name and address prior to speaking. As a reminder, the minute taker is participating remotely this evening. Board members, please be sure to turn on your microphone when you are speaking. If the minute taker is unable to hear, they will ask that you speak louder or turn your microphone on. All right. My name is Joe Hoppick. I'm the chair of the board, and I'm going to turn over to the other board members to introduce themselves.
Jane Taylor, Vice Chair.
Josh Gorman.
That's the first offense, sir.
Richard Clough.
Michael Welsh.
All right, very good. We have some minutes from November 7th and February 6th to review and approve. Does anybody want to? I'm happy to take the harder of the two first, the November 7th minutes. There's some problems with, I guess, the audible on those minutes. Anybody have any suggestions on the November 7th minutes to help us fill in some of these blanks?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
I won't be able to help out. I was not there on the November 7th meeting. But given that there are enough of the inaudible points around, maybe we could leave it as a homework or an assignment over the next month and see if we can fill in the blanks that way.
I'm in favor of that. Does everybody else agree? We don't have to vote on it, just a consensus is fine. All right, so we'll table the November 7th minutes until next meeting. Trying to find. The February 6th minutes, any comments or questions about those? Attorney Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only comment I have is that my name is noted at the end of them for having reviewed and edited them, and I'd just like to note for the record that I just looked for either missing words or typos. I didn't really edit them by changing any text or content.
Do you know what page that's on? So in the packet, it's 42 of 164? Okay. Should we strike the words "and edit it" by, or "and edit it"?
I think that would be helpful.
All right. Can we have a motion to approve these minutes of February 6th, subject to striking the phrase "and edit it" on the last page of the minutes, which is page 42 of 164, or 17 of 17 of the actual minutes? Mr. Gorman.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with the aforementioned edits.
All right. Is there a second? All right. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. The minutes are approved. Now, we have a pretty full agenda tonight. And I know 2303 and 2304, which are the second and third items on the agenda, will not be addressed tonight, and I'm going to take those up first because they'll be the quickest. Ms. Marcoux, do you have anything to tell us about those?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The applicant's the petitioner's representative is not able to make it this evening due to illness, and they have requested that both ZBA 2303 and 2304, both of those for 32 Optical Ave, be continued to the April 3rd meeting.
And we just need a motion to do that. Ms. Taylor, Attorney Taylor.
Thank you. I move that ZBA 23-03 and 23-04 regarding 32 Optical Avenue be continued until the, I believe it's April 3rd.
That's right.
Regular meeting.
Mr. Gorman.
I'll second that.
All right. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. Motion carries 5-0. So we'll remove those items from the agenda tonight, having continued them. The first matter we'll take up will be ZBA 2302, petitioner 100 Nights Foundation, Inc., represented by Jim Fippert of Brickstone Land Use Consultants, LLC, requests an equitable waiver for property located at 122 Water Street, tax map number 585-027-000-000-000, and is in the Business Growth and Reuse District. The petitioner requests an equitable waiver from Article 5, Section 5.42, front setback, to allow a roof overhang to extend 2.87 feet into the front setback. Is there anybody here to speak to that?
Oh, we should call on.
Oh, staff first, yes. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, this property, 122 Water Street is 0.62 acres. It is in the downtown growth, as you mentioned. It is currently a 3-story building being constructed. In November, there was a variance of November of 2020, ZBA number 2011, received a variance for a homeless shelter and a resource center to be built on this property.
Do you want to speak to the reason for the overhang, or do you want to let the applicant do that?
We'll let the applicant do that.
Okay. Mr. Gorman.
What is the setback in that district, Mike?
5 feet,
Okay. So it's about halfway into the setback.
correct.
Great, thank you.
All right, now we'll take the applicant. Oh, Ms. Taylor, Attorney Taylor first. You come on up, though.
Thank you. I was just wondering when I was looking at the ordinance, I got confused because there's a front setback and a corner setback. And usually you don't see a corner setback. So I was kind of confused as to what that distinction is. I think
If you
it's-
just give me a moment to look that up.
While you're looking that up, I'm going to have the applicant introduce herself and present her application.
My name's Mindy Combiar. I'm the Executive Director of 100 Nights. My address is 447 Park Avenue in Keene. Jim Fippert started emailing me this morning at 9 o'clock telling me that he was very, very ill and could not make it tonight. And he sends his apologies. So I am here to say what he told me to say because I didn't expect to be here. So basically, he said that it was an honest mistake on his part and nobody picked up on it until the building was actually built and the roof was where it was. So we are addressing the safety issues by installing ice and snow guards on the roof and eliminating several of the solar panels that we had planned to put up there.
Can you tell us when the error was discovered?
I think it was only a few weeks ago when somebody from the city went by. I don't know the exact details. But it was long after the roof was on. And I think it was when we had our first major snowfall.
Attorney Hoffman,
Mr. Gorman,
could I
yes.
ask a question?
Go ahead.
So, just so I'm clear, because the picture, it doesn't really tell me everything from the application. It's the main roof that is in the setback, or it's a overhang?
I think it's the overhang itself, not the actual roof.
I could follow up with
Oh.
Michael.
Go ahead.
Are you referencing on this, the form that was provided, that corner side setback? Or are you referencing out of the 4.3 section of the Downtown Growth District Code? Okay, from the applicant, I think he's just identifying that it's the corner side of that, but it would be, in the zoning ordinance, it would be considered the side setback, which they provided 10 feet on that side.
Okay. For some reason, I thought it was 5 feet on both sides.
It is. On a corner lot, you're required to provide, it's for the purposes of, and gets into a little bit of the building code, in order to avoid, they added that additional setback for fire separation purposes. Anything within 5 feet of a property line is required to have fire rating on the wall to avoid having to do all of those penetrations going down. There's no doors or openings on that front side, so they've tucked that one up nice and close and are fire rating that completely up and through. If you're looking at it from the front, on the left-hand side, the community way side, there are 2 exits coming out of that side. So in order to avoid some of the code requirements, they tucked it on that and be able to get down and around.
So I'm still confused as to, it's only the Water Street side then that's into the setback?
That is correct.
Okay.
And it's a crown on the building. So the roof edge does come to that crown, but it is it comes out as a eave overhang crown detail, if that makes any sense to you.
So, Mike, the building itself is within the setbacks, the actual footprint. It's just the roof overhang that is hanging out a couple feet.
That is correct.
Okay. And as far as the side setback, to be clear, the zoning would only call for a 5-foot. It's actually the building code and their preference that set them back to the 10 feet.
That is correct.
Great, thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions? Oh, Mr. Walsh.
Got a quick one for the applicant. Regarding the modifications to the plan that have been made since the discovery of this encroachment, you mentioned that solar panels would no longer go on, and that an ice and snow guard would be placed along the roof line. Ice and snow guard means a railing or some sort of barrier that keeps the snow from falling on.
Do
'Cause I
you
know
see the
sometimes-
deer in the headlights look here?
And I'm really sorry to be asking you this.
All I know is that they're putting very fancy ice and snow guards on the roof of the building, and we had to eliminate probably 25% of the solar panels. Yeah. Sorry.
Do you know what, in your application at number 2, it says in here, the site plan shows the building located on the front setback, but it was not included on the overhang on that side of the building. Do you know why the site plan didn't include that?
All I can tell you is what Jim Fipper told me to say, that it was an honest mistake on his part, and then nobody picked up on it. I honestly don't have any other details.
Any other questions? Yes.
I guess this is one for both the applicant and city staff. I'm not hearing any disagreement in the sequence of events about how it was discovered. No contestation about mistake, not mistake, none of that in the testimony that I've heard so far.
I can speak for the city side. It went through all the review process, and 8 different eyes looked at this in many different levels of this construction and did not see the roof overhang. So I can say it was honest oversight in the review process, and certainly nothing that was concealed, or it was just one of those ones that you miss.
Okay. Just so we have a good record, Ms. Cambier, can I just ask you if you can explain or describe to us the level of completion of your building project? How far along is the building?
It's currently between 70 and 75% complete,
Okay.
and the exterior is basically finished. There's some more siding that has to go on, but the exterior is basically finished.
Except for the siding.
Some of the siding is on, some of it isn't. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any other questions?
Just one quick one. Is the roof asphalt shingles?
Yes.
Great. That's it.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions for the applicant? If not, I'll open up to the public. Seeing none, is there any member of the public who has any comments about this application, either for or against? I don't see any comments, so we'll close the public hearing and proceed to deliberations.
What are the criteria for this?
In the application, the criteria listed as a violation was not noticed or discovered by any owner, former owner, owner's agent, or representative or municipal official until after a structure in violation has been substantially completed. That's the applicable part.
Yeah.
And there's some more. The violation was not an outcome of ignorance of the law or ordinance, failure to inquire, obfuscation, misrepresentation, or bad faith on the part of any owner, owner's agent, or representative, but was instead caused by either a good faith error in measurement or calculation made by an owner or an owner's agent, by an error in the ordinance interpretation or applicability made by the municipal official in the process of issuing a permit over which the official had authority. That latter part doesn't really seem to be applicable, but the physical, and the third criterion is that physical or dimensional violation does not constitute a public or private nuisance, nor diminish the value of other property in the area, nor interfere with or adversely affect any present or permissible future use of any such property. And the last one is due to the degree of past construction or investment made in ignorance of the facts constituting the violation, the cost of correction so far outweighs any public benefit to be gained that it would be inequitable to require the violation to be corrected. Attorney Taylor.
If I could ask one more question of city staff. Am I correct in my understanding that the way that the building is constructed, that if the eaves were to be cut back, they'd essentially have to replace the entire roof? Not being a builder myself.
I could say that it would take some substantial re-engineering. These are roof trusses on the building, so it would be a pretty big undertaking to correct this.
Thank you.
Mr. Gorman.
I think it's safe to say that the very reason we have a process for an equitable waiver is a case like this, sort of oversight on both parties, unintentional, and then you end up with something now that is sort of beyond the point of repair. My only concern, of course, is the same concern I'm sure that the applicant and the city has, is just snow load onto sidewalks, but it seems like they have taken steps to address that. And the fact that it's an asphalt roof will prevent any type of real snow slide, such as a metal roof or solar panels, so. Does seem like a reasonable request to me.
Yes, and I agree. I don't think that due to the point of the construction at where it is now, 75% complete, asking them to redo the roof is not a cost worth the benefit. Not worth, it's too costly for the minimal benefit.
It's unfortunate they didn't wait about a dozen years to find this. It would've been-
You want to try to continue this for 10 years? No. All right, I guess I want to say something about public or private nuisance. I don't see, with the safeguards implemented in terms of the snow guards to prevent the ice and snow from tumbling onto the sidewalk, I don't see that this mistake constitutes a public or private nuisance. It will not have any impact on any value of property in the area. And I don't see how it can adversely affect any present or permissible future use of that property or any other property in that area. So I think all these criteria are satisfied. Attorney Taylor.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that, that I think it's pretty clear, both from what was submitted to us and what the city has said and what Ms. Canberra has said, is that this was a true accident, and both parties were operating in good faith. And it was an oops, fortunately only 2.5 feet, and not the building's footprint.
All right, so I guess what we'll do to make our findings of fact, I'm going to apply those criteria and just ask the question. We'll vote on them one by one. Oh, yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve the application for equitable waiver for ZBA 2302.
I'll second.
All right, motion being made and seconded. We'll go through the criteria one at a time. Was the violation not noticed or discovered by any owner, former owner, owner's agent, or representative, or municipal official until after a structure in violation had been substantially completed? If everyone agrees with that, raise your right hand. Or do you want to comment, on the, because I think we've commented on that.
Yeah, I think we should comment on each individual criteria
All right.
for the record, especially with the change in the law.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what we have heard is that the violation was not noticed by either the city or the owner or any of the owner's agents until the exterior of the building, which this impacts, was approximately 75% complete. So I think criteria number 1 is met.
Anybody want to add to that? All those who agree, raise your right hand. All right. Second criterion, was the violation, okay, let me take that back. Was the violation not an outcome of ignorance of the law or ordinance, failure to inquire, obfuscation, misrepresentation, or bad faith on the part of any owner, owner's agent, or representative, but was instead caused by either a good faith error in measurement or calculation made by an owner or owner's agent, or by an error in ordinance interpretation or applicability made by a municipal official in the process of issuing a permit? Mr. Gorman.
I think we've heard from both sides that there was clearly no act of subterfuge. It was just a honest, good old-fashioned mistake.
I agree
So,
with that. Anybody want to add to that? All those in favor? Second criterion passes. The third question is whether the physical or dimensional violation constitutes a public or private nuisance, or diminishes the value of other property in the area, or interferes with or adversely affects any present or permissible future use of such property. Anybody want to comment on that?
Sure. I think we've heard testimony from the owner that they've taken steps to make sure that the violation, now that it's discovered, won't constitute a nuisance or a problem to the property values itself, to the surrounding area. And ice and snow guards, I've heard them called the 2 feet of metal at the end of a roof that sometimes allows snow to slide. We're not doing that. This is something that they're trying to take care of.
Okay, I agree too. All those who agree that the third criterion is satisfied, please raise your right hand. It's unanimous. Last criterion, whether due to the degree of past construction or investment made in ignorance of the facts constituting the violation, the cost of correction so far outweighs any public benefit to be gained that it would be inequitable to require the violation to be corrected. Mr. Clough.
I think we heard that because of the design and the truss system, you can't cut it back. You wouldn't be able to make it flush with the building, which would bring it back to code. Besides the fact that would possibly impact the structural integrity of the building in terms of water coming in against it and stuff like that over a long period of time. So it could possibly damage the building if we were to alter it that way. I think that what they've come up with is the only way to mitigate it without, in the confines of what we've got.
Right. All those who agree, oh, Mr. Attorney Keller.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the expense part, that the expense of doing anything to try and change the building is just not reasonable.
All right. Oh, Mr. Gorman.
Furthermore, there'd be very little gain in doing so. You'd just be moving a drip line, basically.
Right. All right, all those in favor, all those who agree that the fourth criterion is satisfied, raise your right hand. That's again unanimous. The fifth criterion does not apply to this application, so we'll skip over that. And we'll vote on the main motion now for 2302, sorry. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. None opposed, unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take up next 23-05. Jennifer Whitehead and Hans, I'm not going to pronounce your last name, sir, correctly, but. Sorry? Come on up. Have a seat.
This is not Jennifer, but.
Oh, thanks for telling us. We're going to hear from the city first, but you guys make yourself comfortable. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is 190 South Lincoln Street. It's located on a .13 acre lot, zoned medium density. It is a 2-story with an attic. It's 1,600 square feet, single-family home built in 1920. Currently, there are no variances that we could find on our records for this property. One of the things we want to clarify is that in the application, the reference to Article 3.6.2 is actually for low density and not for the medium density where this is located. I think it was just a Scribner error on the application. Maybe they can clarify that as they present tonight.
Any questions of the city? Attorney Taylor?
Yeah, could you clarify that I didn't follow the ordinance section?
Sure. Under 3.6.2 is actually referencing low density. The section that they're looking for relief from is actually 3.5.2, which is medium density.
Medium density instead of high
Low.
density?
High density, that's what.
Joe, can I ask Mike a
Yeah.
question? So, Mike, it appears to me that basically what's happening is there's two abutters that have agreed to adjust a boundary line. And basically that has created this situation by moving a line, but that nothing materially is going to change on the property. Is that accurate?
So my understanding of the application when we met was they're seeking relief out of 3 different sections by moving this line. Currently, if you were to go out there and you can see in the picture, it already looks like that line exists the way it is. There's already a garden right up next to the garage. The fence is right on that line essentially. So it's not. They're just looking to make it right by seeking this variance
Great.
of
Thank
these
you.
3 sections.
Thank you.
Any further questions for staff? Gentlemen, you have the floor. Just state your name and your address so we have a clear record. Thank you.
My name is Hans Poschitz. I live at 196 South Lincoln Street in Keene, New Hampshire.
My name is Aaron Cooper. I live at 190 South Lincoln Street.
If you want to just speak to your criteria and, whatever background you think would be helpful to us in making a decision would be great.
Yeah, I guess Mr. Hagan said it properly. We just want to make it right what has been used for years between the two different property owners, as the yard, the room between the two houses on the two properties has been split by the property line through an awkward diagonal. That sort of like really just gave a full use of the space to either of the properties. But over the years, ever since Jennifer bought the property, that yard had been, or even before that, had been used by 196. Aaron actually didn't even know that was part of his. So when we discovered that, and we had a good relationship with Aaron, we said, well, we'd like to clean that up. But being in the medium density with a small property puts us up against all of these stipulations that we're trying to get basically a variance for tonight. The primary concern that we have sort of like in terms of a potential hardship, in the back part of that yard, there's a lot of roofs dumping into that area. So for our basement, we see water coming in on a regular basis. If the property line as currently drawn would be potentially like covered with an impervious material or area, it could amplify really the concern and the risk of having more water because less pervious ground in that area. Being part of our property would allow us to keep it basically impervious. Pervious, I'm sorry, pervious.
So that water leaches through the ground. you
Correct,
mean? Yeah,
and not
okay.
into
So I
our,
thought-
yes,
I think I understood what you meant anyway.
okay.
Any questions by the members? If you want to add anything more, please feel free.
No, I agree with everything Hans has to say. It's just cleaning it up. Like he said, I didn't even realize that I owned that little bit of property. And it's not even usable for me. To get to that property, I'd have to go around my garage to a little tiny piece of land.
So I don't know if you can see this from back from where you are, but there's this white line that's going through that picture. You've probably seen the picture before, right? I don't know if there's any.
Yeah,
but
I've seen the
It's on the
pictures.
screen.
It's
There it is. So, is that where that's where the property line is right now?
Oh, sort of, yes.
Sort of.
I think there's a better picture in one of the schematics where I drew out the changes in the exhibit.
But you want to put the property line basically abutting your garage and then a straight line to the street from the corner of the garage, essentially.
Yeah, like stepping back from the garage, but following the, I guess we just talk about the eve line on the first application here that was heard tonight. We are sticking with the eve line to count that as the building line on the
Okay.
property line. So it's a 6-inch overhang.
Attorney Taylor?
Yeah, a question for the city staff. So, in essence, this would make, I'm gonna get these addresses wrong, 196 South Lincoln a little bit more conforming, even though it's still gonna be a non-conforming lot?
That is correct.
And it's going to make 190 a little less conforming?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Just have a quick question for both the applicant and the neighbor. Have you got folks made provisions for repairing the garage? Have you given that any thought?
Yeah, it's in our interest to make that side of the garage look good, so we've already offered to him that we will take care of that side of the garage.
Okay. So you'll take care of his backside of his garage?
Yes.
Well, this is about as well as neighbors could work together, so.
I was gonna pick vegetables out of his garden that was on my property, but.
Have you signed your boundary line adjustment yet, your agreement? Or is that
No.
not that far along in the process?
We were advised to seek these variances first and then start the bond-related
Okay.
adjustment process.
Attorney Taylor?
Yeah, just so I'm understanding this, so I noticed there's a door on the side of the garage at 190 South Lincoln. So if you ever use that side door, you basically, will you be able to walk on your own property to get to the street if you wanted to?
At 190 South Lincoln Street, there's no side door on that side of the garage.
There's 2 windows.
Okay,
I believe, if you're judging from the photo, that's a post in the yard that looks like a
Oh,
door.
okay.
It
It
does
kind of
look like a
looks
door,
like,
doesn't it?
a door from that perspective. Thank you.
Any other question from members? In that case, I'll open it up to the public. Anybody in the public for this application want to speak in favor of it? Seeing none, does anybody wish to speak in opposition to it? Seeing none. Any further questions by the members? Going once, going twice? All right. I guess we can close the public hearing on this matter and proceed to our deliberations. Mr. Gorman?
It may make sense to just go through the criteria one at a time.
Sure. Attorney Taylor?
I would just like to say I wish all neighbors would get along to this extent. It's really nice to see compared to what we occasionally do see.
And in that vein, I would say, make the following comment or observation in connection with criteria number 1. It is certainly in the public interest to encourage that kind of agreement. So, for that reason, I think the first criterion is satisfied. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
Mr. Chair, procedural,
Yes,
was there a motion, or are you guys getting?
we're just deliberating right now.
Just deliberating, I'm
Yep.
sorry.
But if somebody wants to make a motion, I didn't see a hand, but we can certainly take one.
Or we can just talk through them.
Talk through, and then we'll make a motion, sure. Now, in terms of the spirit of the ordinance, I don't see anything in this application that would change the character of the neighborhood in terms of safety of any kind, or impact the neighborhood in a negative way. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. Mr. Gorman?
We just need to keep in mind that this is an imaginary line that already exists. So I don't see how it can be contrary to really the spirit of the ordinance or public interest. It just doesn't have a true impact on anyone except the two folks that are sitting in front of us.
It does nothing to add to density.
Here.
That doesn't create fire issues, doesn't do anything like that. Attorney Taylor?
And I think what it does is it basically reflects what's already on the ground
Exactly.
and how the properties are already being used.
Right.
And now it's just bringing the legal stuff into conformity with what's already there. Stuff is a legal term of art, by the way.
We will see that in the minutes next time.
Yep.
I guess on that point, I think the gain to the public for denying this would be nothing. The harm to the applicants would be significant. So it's like Attorney Taylor said, that's their world, they're living there, that's their space. It has no impact on anybody. In that same vein, I don't see how it affects surrounding properties in any way, in terms of values.
I would also add on number 4 that it doesn't have to actually raise the value, it just needs to not diminish it. And
Correct.
Clearly does not do that.
I agree with that.
It will have a 0 effect.
Zero effect. And I would tend to agree that the current configuration of the two subject properties is an interesting, unique characteristic of the property. And they've managed to use that space in a way that's, has no impact on the surrounding area.
I also think there's some merit to the argument about, you know, it being in the spirit of self-preservation for them, just with drainage between the two properties. It's an opportunity to improve that area, and at least someone has ownership of it, that has an interest in it. So I think the hardship is there, given the current scope of what exists
Yep.
on the ground.
I think you're right. Attorney Taylor?
And I think that what they're proposing is eminently reasonable, which is the other portion of that.
Yep.
I'm just trying to figure out how I can get someone to take care of the backside of my garage.
Well, maybe you have 2 volunteers right here. In terms of the motion, there are 3, looks like there are 3 parts to this. I'm not quite sure how you want to handle, how the board wants to handle that. There's a smaller lot size than prescribed, there's a smaller side setback than prescribed, and there's less than 3 feet distance from a driveway to the property line. Now, this is one application, I'm happy to treat it as one motion. I don't think we need to do 3. Does anybody disagree?
I'm satisfied treating it as one motion.
Okay. Would you be so kind as to make that motion?
Sure. Move to accept, approve ZBA 2305, request for a variance for a property located 190 South Lincoln Street, following the terms and conditions and the various variance portions listed in the application material.
I'll second that.
Okay. Let's go through the criteria then. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. Does anybody want to comment on that criterion? Comment further?
I think, given that we discussed each one individually and made acute points to each one, that would satisfy this new bill. If you and Attorney Taylor agree, I think that we could be comfortable just voting on the criteria.
Okay, then we'll go right to voting on the criteria. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. Does everybody agree with that? Unanimous. If the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. Everybody agrees? Yep. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. Unanimous? If the variance were granted, the values of the surrounding properties would not be diminished. Everybody agrees? Owing to the special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, denial of the variance would result in an unnecessary hardship because there is no fair and substantial relationship existing between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property. Everybody agree? We all agree with that. And the use is a reasonable use. We all agree with that. Unanimous. All those in favor of approving 2305, please raise your right hand. The application is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good luck. We're going to take up 2306 and 2307, and I have to recuse myself from this, these two applications. And the consequence of that is that you're going to have a four-member board. Because we don't have an alternate here.
Four-member, right?
Four-member.
We're
These-
prepared to proceed.
Okay. Just give me a second.
I think it's 3 petitions. There's a special exception as well.
Is that right? All right. Well, you're going to take over. So just give me a second to move my stuff, and then we'll just get started.
While Attorney Hoppeck is moving his stuff.
That's another legal term of art, you know.
Yep. Well, it is now, at least. I think what I'm proposing, if it's okay with the rest of the board, is that we take the two variances, because the nature of a special exception is different. So we handle the two variances first. And certainly, the information can be presented together, and we'll just vote on them separately, and then we'll handle the special exception after we deal with the variances. Is that okay with everybody?
Absolutely.
I'll come back to close the meeting.
Okay. So this is the, excuse me, I've been losing my voice all day. This is great. This application's for two separate variances for 438 Washington Street, ZBA 2306, which is a variance to permit a multifamily housing use where not permitted in the low-density district per Chapter 100, Article 3.3.5 of the zoning regulations, and ZBA 23-07, which is a request for a variance to allow building coverage more than 35% impervious surfaces, more than 45% and 50% less green open space per Chapter 100, Article 3.3.3 of the zoning regulations. So, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair. This is a property located at 438 Washington Street, 2.4 acres, zoned low density. Currently is a two-story building, about 19,417 square feet. The last use of the building was the community college system of New Hampshire. Previous to that, it was the school district. There are no variances on record or ZBA applications on records. There's multiple building permits for additions throughout the years since 1926, so I wouldn't go through them all.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for staff? I may have, so if you give me a minute, because I wasn't planning on chairing this.
Madam Chair, I have a quick question of staff. And I was wondering, Mr. Hagan, if you could walk us through the array of zoning districts in this area and you know, where you find high, where you find low, where you find medium. Seems like a complicated mix.
It is a complicated mix. Without looking at it, everything abutting this property is in low density. They're including across the street. So if you take it from, I forget the name of the road that goes across. You got Woodbury up top and the road down below. That surrounding is all low density on both sides of that street, as well as across the way. There was the building on the corner that is now housed by Williams Construction, that was also in low density and was seeking a variance. So it's kind of a commercial corridor, but on those sides it's surrounded by low density, which, as you can see, there's the lower corner, there is a commercial car garage down the way. There's a couple of multifamilies in the area on the corner of Woodbury and Washington, across the way, not directly on the corner of George Street, but just one up from that corner, single family. That's a multifamily, as well as a couple others going down that way. But for the most part, there's a lot of single family, and then you have an industrial building down behind that sits lower, which is People's Linen. So, well, no problem.
Mike, this application, what uses would be allowed for this building in the low-density district? Can you run through those real quickly?
I can, if you can give me a moment.
Okay, yeah, you can get back to us, that's fine. I'm fine with proceeding to Attorney Taylor if we have to wait for this. Fine.
Well, I have a question, probably have to wait for it too.
Okay.
So I can proceed with that. Permitted uses in the low-density district are dwelling, single-family, group homes small, community garden, conservation area, and telecommunications facility.
Thank you.
So multifamily are allowed?
No.
No, I thought this,
It's a dwelling, single-family.
So basically, that huge brick building would have to become a single-family home, a community garden, a telecommunications facility, or what was the other one? A small group home.
Small group
Which is
home.
less than 8 rooms, correct?
Correct, yes. The current use for that is actually an off, for the university system, it's considered a business use group or an office assembly. So if that type of use wanted to go back in to a certain extent, I don't know what kind of other could fit into that niche without putting a lot of money to it. But it's definitely, it would be you'd have to find the right person,
Yep.
for sure.
Thank you.
so my question was, low density, and this is 3.3.5? So it says residential uses are single-family, two-family, and multifamily, but the CRD, at least that's what my updated pages say.
I don't have that there. It's in low density. Are you looking at low density 1 maybe?
No,
3.3.5.
Yeah, that's what I'm
It's-
looking at, because we got the revised pages when they changed the CRD.
So conservation residential development is allowed in low density, but you'd have to meet that, you'd have to go for a CRD in
Okay,
order to do
all right.
that, which would be a conditional use permit, planning, approval, there's a whole
Yeah, I
process.
looked at it, it looked a little daunting. My question, I have a question that kind of follows on what Mr. Welch said, and on Washington Street, I'm not sure you can tell from that map, and we didn't have a good map of it in our packet. How far down Washington Street, going out, away from downtown, does the low-density district go?
I don't have the map right in front of me, but I believe it goes up to, it does change again. I think there's a little bit of spot zoning up there for what was existing. Without exactly looking at it, I couldn't tell you without looking at the map, but it does abut, now that we're looking at the map, it does abut medium density, as you can see in that green. That is medium density, and then you see the high density there in the orange, so.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay. So the teal color, I'm trying to figure out what color is what, and I can't tell from this distance.
It looks green to me, but I could be colorblind.
Well, I mean, it's a greenish yellow, who
Yeah.
knows what it is, and that's all low density?
So the yellow is all low density. The green moving south towards Main Street is medium density. And then you have the goldish brown color as high density. And then you have the light teal color, light green color, which is conservation.
Okay. So, the school building that we're talking about is?
Right there,
Thank you.
yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions for staff?
Nope.
In that case, we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Attorney Taylor. My name's Adam Caseta. I'm pinch hitting for Steve Bragdon, who is not available this evening. It's his petition, but he's not available, and we just found that out today. So I am pinch hitting, and I appreciate you hearing from us. I would point out, since we're talking about the zoning nearby, the one thing that also is nearby is the Citizens Way development that's high density, that multifamily is just up the, I'd say, what is it, a block away maybe, and up behind it, just off of Washington Street as well. It's sort of right off of that map that you were being shown there. I think it probably makes sense for Josh Meehan, who's with me here, to give a sort of high-level description of what the project entails, and then I can go through the criteria for the variance. And I guess I'd ask the board to, first, we do agree to go forward with just 4 members, and I'd ask you to open all 3 of our petitions, and then dedicate what time we have in order. And I think we start with the use variance, the first one, which we've been discussing.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I think what we'll do is we'll handle the variances first, and then go on to the special exception, because they're different criteria and
I think it
all
makes a
that.
lot of sense, yes.
Okay, so,
All right. Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name's Josh Meehan. I'm Executive Director of Keene Housing. And one thing that I just wanted to quickly point out is that the petitioner is Monadnock Affordable Housing Corporation. That is an affiliate nonprofit of Keene Housings. Keene Housing, as you probably know, is the housing authority created by the city of Keene in 1965. And our sole purpose is to create housing that people can afford in the city of Keene. We currently own 600 units. Our occupancy rate right now is 99.2%. Another way of saying that is we have 0.8 vacant units as of January 23. We currently have 1,344 unique applicants waiting for the 600 units that we currently have. 72% of those on our wait list are waiting for a studio or 1-bedroom apartment. And you'll note that the project that we're proposing consists of 75 one-bedroom, 75% one-bedroom units and 25% two-bedroom units. A total of 60 units in two-phase project, each phase with 30 units. Most of the people that we house in small units like that currently are elderly or disabled. And we've been looking for a site for quite some time that would suit that particular population, because those one-bedrooms, studios make up such a large portion of our waiting list, as I said. So we've been looking for a site that is on public transportation, is close to downtown, and something you're probably really familiar with, not in the floodplain, because we use federal funds for our developments, and we can't do any development in a floodplain with federal money. So we are proposing a two-phase project, 30 units each project, each phase. And one of the phases does include an adaptive reuse of the old school building. And will be funded, if we are successful moving through here and onwards, will be funded primarily through tax credits and ongoing operating subsidy through HUD's Fair Cloth to Rad program. And I'll just finish up, because I know none of that really addresses the details that you all are particularly interested necessarily. But we did have a meeting with the abutters on Thursday night, which was very well attended. I'd say we'd had 20 or so folks show up for that meeting on Thursday.
Mr. Wehrman?
So, 60, how many units total? Sorry.
60 total, so
Great.
two phases, 30 each.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And could you go over the capacity? I didn't catch that.
Sure, so it's 75% of the units will be one-bedrooms and 25% will be twos. I believe that's 8 two-bedrooms per 30, if I'm doing the math. I'm gonna look at, our architect, Jonathan Halley, is here too to answer questions, and he has all those numbers banging around his head.
I think it'd be 45 and 15,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So no studios, just
No
one
studios,
bedroom.
yep, ones and twos. But again, primarily ones.
Could you tell me what your demographic is?
Sure. Well, generally, it kind of depends on the bedroom size we're talking about, but for ones in particular, it's typically going to be an elder or an elderly couple or a young person with disabilities. The average income for our elderly population is around $17,000 a year, so those are folks on fixed incomes typically, living on Social Security and maybe some annuities. They typically don't have cars, although of course some do, and I think there is a traffic study and a parking analysis in your packet, and you can see there that we have on average, we have a lot more parking spaces than we have people who need those parking spaces. And this would be, there would be an income ceiling, income eligibility for this property. It would be restricted to people at 50% of area median income or less. So for a couple, for two folks, that's about $38,000 a year in income.
Could you tell me how you decided on two buildings of 30 units each?
Yeah, it's really driven by the low-income housing tax credit, which is a tax, it's really the only production program left in the United States. It's a tax credit it's actually an IRS program, and it's administered through New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, and so, which is called NIFA, the acronym is NIFA. And NIFA has development caps that they put on each allocation of tax credits each year. And the idea there is, because New Hampshire gets the small state allocation, we don't get a lot of tax credit. So NIFA keeps the development caps relatively low so that, for example, Manchester doesn't do a 300-unit tax credit job and then suck up all the credits for the state for the year. So instead, they keep the caps somewhat low. which thereby results in most tax credit developments being in the 26 to 30 unit range, because that's kind of as many as you can build with the equity you're able to get through the tax credit program. So that's why this is proposed as a two-phase project, one tax credit allocation for the first phase and then another one for the second.
So for what time period would that be?
Well, I'll defer to Jonathan for the construction time period. However, the tax credit rounds, basically you put in your application, your pre-application in July, full application in August, and then sometime in the fall, you learn that you've got the tax credit allocation. And that's usually the corpus of the capital you're collecting to do a project like this. So once we know that we have the funding set by fall, then we would usually begin a few months later. But we're well, and we get going on design in the anticipation that we'll have a successful application.
And what would happen if you got your first allocation of tax credits if this was granted, but the second one didn't come through?
We would hold and then reapply. However, NIFA's tax credit, the way that the tax credit application process works is it's a point system, sort of like the Community Development Block Grant Program, which we also, Keene Housing, as you may be aware, we sort of really rely on that CDBG program for a lot of the work that we do. So it's a point allocation, and what NIFA does is they award extra points for phase 2 applications, sort of to recognize that the system that they've constructed requires you to come in phases typically. So we certainly couldn't guarantee that if we were successful in phase 1, that we would immediately get a tax allocation again, a credit allocation for phase 2, but we'd be fairly confident that we would. But if we didn't, we would simply reapply the next round after that.
Perhaps, Attorney Casado, you'd like to go through the criteria?
Yes, thank you. I would. So this building is, I suspect everybody's familiar with it. It was last used as a community college, or River Valley Community College up on Washington Street. And River Valley Community College is part of the community college systems of New Hampshire and is therefore state-owned and exempt from zoning. Before that, it was, I believe, city-owned as a public school, so it really hasn't had any zoning. It's 2.4 acres, which means we can't do that CRD development, which requires 5 acres on the site. I think it's 5 acres for low density. In my application, I said 10, but that's for a different district. But I think it's a minimum of 5 in low density. So as we go through my application, and I know you've all had a chance to read it, so I'm not going to read it to you, but whether this is in the public interest and granting the variance would not be in the public interest, I'd suggest that granting this variance would be in the public interest. Is my microphone not close enough? I'm sorry. So we're on whether it's in the public interest. Thank you, Corinne. The public interest, if you look through the master plan from which this zoning ordinance comes and is derived, it's no secret that we've got a shortage of housing in the city of Keene, and in particular, affordable housing. Josh already spoke to you about the 1,300 plus unique people sitting on the waiting list for Keene Housing and for housing. And some of them are applying for multiple locations, so it's actually more like 3,000. Yeah, because they apply for different locations. So the waiting list is very long for housing, and there's clearly a need for housing in this community. So what I would suggest to you is that certainly would serve the public interest by permitting more housing to be built. 60 units will put a dent in it. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it would put a dent in it. And there aren't, as Josh indicated, a lot of properties that will support this type of housing and be appropriate for the community and for the population that would live there. So I would suggest to you that the public interest is met by allowing this variance so that we can provide more housing, and in particular more affordable housing. With respect to the second inquiry, which is whether the variance, if it's granted, will still observe the spirit of the ordinance, I'd suggest to you that granting this variance to permit the multifamily use on the property is within the spirit of the ordinance. And I'd suggest that the ordinance isn't just this land development code. It encompasses the master plan, which directs that we have this. And that is, line after line in the master plan talks about smart growth, increasing the need for housing, and improving on housing opportunities within the town and within the city, and in particular in and around downtown. Now, we're 0.8 miles from Central Square, so I did my Google walk inquiry, and it says it's 16 minutes at a reasonable clip. So we're within that, and it's, you know, biking distance, walking distance. We're on city bus. So what the ordinance indicates is that we should have housing and take advantage of housing opportunities in that area to support a robust downtown Keene. So you also, as I mentioned earlier, the ordinance does contemplate multifamily use in this district as part of a CRD, the Conservation Residential District Development. But unfortunately, because we're only 2.4 acres, we can't, 2.37, we can't take advantage of that opportunity to do this. And one other indication that the ordinance, the spirit of the ordinance would be met by this is that the ordinance provides for a housing density credit for affordable housing. And that is as part of the subdivision, so you get a 20% density credit, and we meet that criteria of low-income housing because, you know, that language in the ordinance tracks what Josh was explaining to you about its funding sources. So we meet that, and therefore I'd say that you know, this ordinance already sort of carves out some exceptions for this type of housing, and that's what we're trying to do. But unfortunately, there aren't a lot of places where we can go and do that. So we're here before you, asking for a variance so that we can do that, because, you know, you can't draw a zoning map that's perfect, because you've got low density over a property that's exempt, and there's a school there. So the next issue that the board is well aware it needs to deal with is granting the variance. Will it do substantial justice? You know, there was a case, and I cited it in my materials here, where the Supreme Court found that improving a dilapidated area of town to provide affordable housing was found to do substantial justice. Now, this isn't a dilapidated area of town. I'm not suggesting that it is, but this building's really not being used right now to its full potential. It's just sort of sitting there. The community college systems in New Hampshire, I think they have, you know, people in and out of it, but it's not, as far as I can tell, and as far as I'm sure the board's aware, there isn't a lot of active classrooms going on right there at this time. So it's really not being, well, I guess I would say it's being underutilized, and because of that, potentially it's falling into disrepair. And what we want to do is meet the public's need, and I'd suggest that what we're proposing to do and develop this property for 60 units of affordable housing is also actually consistent with the area's present use. Now, it's zoned as single family, but as Mr. Hagan indicated, there are multifamily housing properties nearby. You've got the Citizens Way right around the corner. Across the street at 543 Washington Street, there's a multifamily housing building. That's, I think it's 30 units in total between the two buildings. So I'd suggest what we're proposing is a better use of the property than letting it just sort of sit there, and it would be consistent with the neighborhood. And so I'd also suggest to you that it doesn't harm the neighborhood to have new, well-maintained properties like Keene Housing, and this property would be managed by Keene Housing like Josh was suggesting. So rather than having a building there that is not being used, we'd have two buildings there that are and are being maintained. And that gets to the next point about whether this would diminish the values of the neighborhood. I included an article in the materials from Alexandria, Virginia, where there was a study done about housing, in particular low-income housing, and whether that does diminish the value of the neighborhoods. And sort of a misconception that because there's low-income housing, it's going to drop the value of surrounding properties. And that's not what they found in Alexandria, Virginia, in Alexandria. Now, there isn't a comparable study in Keene, New Hampshire, but this is the best that we could come up with, was an actual study. And Josh might be able to speak to that more, but well-maintained neighborhoods are what helps to drive property values. And I'll also point out that this property is not on the tax rolls, but here it would probably be subject to a pilot or something of that nature with Keene Housing or with Monadnock Affordable Housing. So, those are all considerations about value, and we'd suggest to you that it does not diminish the value of surrounding properties. To the contrary, just letting a building sit there like it is, exempt from zoning and being underutilized, diminishes the value of surrounding properties. And then the big one, right? Hardship. Why is this a hardship? And as I think about, is this property unique? It is. It's got a giant 19,000 square foot building on it that predates the ordinances and is a school. It's an industrial type building. It's in a place, because it's exempt, it's in a place where it can only be used realistically as a single-family dwelling. A communications tower, no, it's not tall enough. Could it be used as a CRD? No, it can't. So really, because of the unique nature of this property, as encumbered by this building, it can't be used. So I don't see any possibility of somebody coming in and tearing down this property at a price tag of about a little over $1 million, tearing it down and then building a single-family home or converting this school into a single-family home. It's unrealistic. So the property is stuck in limbo, and and I'll point out, private schools aren't allowed in this district. So it couldn't be a school without a variance. It'd have to be a public school or owned by the or an exempt government organization, as far as I can tell. So we're stuck with this building and with this property, 2.4 acres. So what can you do with it to make it useful? And we think that a reasonable use of that is to convert it to multifamily housing, which is what this community needs. And the best use of that property, and the highest and best use of that property, is to get 60 units in there of high quality, affordable housing, as Josh described. So we think there's a hardship because there isn't anything else to do with it. And then the next question of whether it's a reasonable use, and we think it is, given what's needed in this town, or city, excuse me, for the population. And considering, so we're working within the rest of the ordinance too, right? I mean, we've got height restrictions. It can only be 2 stories. So we've got to sort of sprawl a little bit. And really, to make it worthwhile at this price point, 60 units is what we would propose to do, because 30, it's like, just to acquire it, to put in 30 units isn't quite worth it. It changes the equation significantly. So we would suggest that our application is a reasonable use of the property that can't otherwise be used. And I guess I'm not sure the state cares whether it's used, but we do. And I think the city cares.
Thank you. You said you had your architect here. I was wondering if we could hear something about the building, especially that second building, which would be included in this, and
Sure, yep, absolutely.
Madam Chair, my name is Jonathan Hawley. I'm with Warren Street Architects. Where would you like me to start?
well, we know what one building looks like.
So there are some there are some exonometrics that are on the board now that you can see. So when Josh first approached me, honestly, I came up with a concept to put almost 90 units on this property. And housing is an interesting thing because it's driven by financing and how to put these packages together, and it's always a balancing act. I had, we could have come before you and asked for additional height variances. We could have talked about additional lot coverage, all of these different things. But in the reality of working through with the whole team, we came up with 2 phases. The proposal is to do, is one fee simple lot. We would create 2 land condominium units to support the 2 phases, because each phase is financed on its own merits. It has to have its own utilities, its own water, sewer connections, standalone. One is the first phase being the back building. We've chosen the back building simply because we want to do all of the site improvements and the back building to get people in. Phase 2 would be the renovation, the demo of the auditorium and the addition, simply because then we can stage the construction along Washington Street and not put the burden of 2 years of construction on the people that have already moved into the back of the property.
Could you, if I could stop you, you started off by saying 2 condominium units. I didn't really understand what you meant.
So the property would be subject to a subdivision at the planning board level, and we would create 2 land condominium units. That allows us to develop each phase on its own land unit. So it owns its land unit and the interest in the fee simple lot underneath it as part of a condominium association. But that land unit and the building, phase 1 and phase 2, are standalone projects. And we provide all the utilities, so they're standalone. They're financed individually. The first phase, both being tax credits, but there could be different investors that own phase 1 than who own phase 2, depending on when those tax credits are allocated over time.
Yeah, if I could, so an example of that is where our headquarters are at 831 Court Street. If you're familiar, there's Stone Arch Village Senior, and then there's our offices, and then there's Stone Arch Village Family. Those are, it's like exactly like this, condos with 2 different tax credit properties on that. What looks to a person walking by as if one big piece of land that we
So
own.
the condos are only the land units.
Okay.
Not condominiums like you might think of 5 condos, aligned as part of that kind of, it's just the land itself that allows for financing of individual projects. So we did an entire design exercise where we scaled the buildings down to 2 stories. We looked at the parameters of the property. We've gotten everything down to these 2 variances and the special exception in terms of making it completely code compliant, if you will. The buildings are considered 5B construction. They're 2 stories. They could be wood frame, but they might be metal stud. But they're a simple 2-story slab on grade, asphalt shingle roof, very consistent with what you'll find in the neighborhood. The buildings are sprinkled. They have a fire suppression system.
Excuse me for interrupting, because a lot of that's for the planning board.
Yeah.
But will it meet all the other setbacks and all the other requirements?
Other than the ones that we're applying for, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And how close is that back building to the nearest residential, single family or whatever?
Can you pull up the site plan? We're well within the building setback. And we went round robin with town staff, city staff, in that we found out that Woodbury is actually considered the front yard and not Washington Street because of the corner lot and the Woodbury having a smaller frontage. So the setbacks are related to that. The front yard happens to be Woodbury with the retaining wall. Washington is a side yard. the back property line, which is perpendicular to Woodbury, is a side yard, and then the rear yard would be that to Hebert, or what is the name of that?
To the south.
To the south, yeah. Yeah.
I was just concerned with that two-story, quite sizable building for the area.
Yep, so you'll,
How close it was to the residential properties up Woodbury, which I guess would be
so
to
we
the
managed
west.
to locate that building without cutting the tree line. So we had the property surveyed, we had it field verified, and we're placing the building in such a way that the neighborhood meeting brought up a couple of issues. There's a very large oak tree in the north, I'm gonna call it the northwest corner up on Woodbury Street. That will not be removed. There's a couple of other pines that were mentioned that the neighbor would like to have removed. We had not intended to take down. But essentially, we're getting that, we've placed that building such that we don't have to affect the tree line. The side yard setback, I believe, is 25 feet along perpendicular to Woodbury, going out.
It's
That's a
50 in
very
the front,
Front.
10 on the sides, 20 in the rear.
20 in the rear. So on the northwest corner, the building's probably a good 40 feet from that property line. And in the southwest corner, which is opposite Woodbury, the building sets right on the building setback, so it's kind of skewed on an angle. And it would
The
be 10
existing
feet.
building or the new
The
building?
new building, I'm sorry, yeah, the new building. Probably more than half of the new building is in an area that is paved parking lot today. There's a paved area in the back.
Or what's left of paved parking lot?
Yes.
And I guess the other question I have, and I appreciate your putting that up because I had real trouble figuring out what was in the packet because it was so small. So are you still planning to have the primary entrances on Washington Street?
So, no. I do believe that the primary entrances to both buildings will be off the parking lot in the middle between the two buildings. So the entrances to the building in the back would face the parking lot, which is not in the front yard because of the orientation of Woodbury. And more than likely, that part, the main entrance, if you will, to the existing school and the addition to it would be off that parking lot as well. There are some parking spaces along Washington Street, and we do intend to leave the entrance that is that link between the auditorium and the school building. So there will be an entrance there for those that choose to park on that side, but it won't be the main entrance.
But as far as vehicular entrance from a city street, the primary one will be Washington Street?
It will. So if I can orient you to the north, there's an entrance on the corner lot. That's going to be a one-way in, okay? That brings you up and around to the parking lot. The curb cut directly opposite George Street will be 3 lanes, actually. A right lane, a left lane, and I'm not quite sure what that middle lane is. Again, I apologize.
Yeah,
These
hopefully
are
it's
small.
not, you're not going to see people darting across Washington Street onto George Street.
No. But that curb cut, which is currently about 35 feet, is going to be in the same location. We did have a traffic memo done, and we talked about it, and we oriented it so that it is directly opposite George Street. And the civil engineer is actually doing turning radiuses for the fire department to accommodate all of the ladder trucks and all the rest of that. So I believe we're all compliant.
Thank you. Does anybody have any additional questions? Mr. Gorman?
My question is for any one of the 3 of you that cares to field it, or all 3 of you for that matter. I guess I get the gist of your application that the city has this existing big brick building that needs to be repurposed and is sort of hamstrung by its zoning. and it's almost impossible to meet zoning while repurposing this building. I get all of that, but I guess the question I have, or concern more so, is taking a situation that is presented as sort of a unique situation and then building more buildings to make it more unique, and more sort of out of touch with zoning, if you will, or even surrounding properties. What is the, in a nutshell, what is the importance of having the second building? Is it just financial viability, or just a
Yeah.
matter of taking as much as you can for the sake of being able to develop this property?
Well, I think it's actually a combination of both. So there's an economy of scale that we need to meet, especially given the agreed-upon purchase price, and obviously, it's not up to the seller to care very much about our economies of scale. And so in order for this to pencil out, this two-phase project, 60 units, 2 LIHTC syndications is really the way that the math works best. The profound need for these units in our community is not something that we have to I have to disregard. You can disregard it entirely, but that's a big part of it too. We just don't have a lot of opportunity to build housing that folks need that's in Keene, that sort of checks those good planning boxes that I mentioned earlier. Get to town easily, you can get on the bus, all that stuff. But certainly a 30-unit project here, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us economically.
Could I add to that, Josh?
Please.
Use this microphone over here.
Oh, yeah.
There's, is that, it seems to be on. Can you hear me okay? All right, so there is the profound need, and you heard Jonathan say also that, he started this at 90 units. And, if we had our druthers, we'd go up, but we're trying to make it as reasonable as possible, because that's part of what we have to do when you seek a variance, is to make it reasonable. So that goes to that element, is trying to be reasonable with what you're doing. We're also balancing a lot of different things within the ordinance, and you heard Jonathan say we whittled it down to just 2 variances and a special exception for the parking, and which I can speak to later. And I did include the parking study and traffic study for your review, but we're trying to balance all those competing interests to do the most reasonable and best use of the property within, and also make it worthwhile to meet the need of the public. So hope that answers your question.
I just want to point out too that doing housing is very difficult. We start this today, we don't finish the 2 phases for more than 5 years from now. We're only adding 60 units to the housing need, across the city. That's how long it's going to take us to realize this. If we could do all 60 units in one phase in a slam dunk, Josh would say, we go for it. But we can't figure out how to do that with the financing that's available. And Madam Chair, I just want to recognize that Matt Moore is actually here representing the community college system, the owner. He's the director of facilities for the college system. If you have any questions, he can speak to how long this property has been on the market. And we've been in negotiations for over a year just to get to this point, what to do with this piece of property. It's encumbered with, we don't need to talk about it tonight, but the retaining wall and the city and who owns it and how's it going to get repaired. And there's a lot of pieces and parts to make this happen.
Anybody else have additional questions? Thank you. If we have more, we'll ask.
Thank you very much.
Is there anybody who would like to speak in favor of the variances? And, well, maybe we could hear from Mr. Moore then, from the Community College First system. Get your perspective on how usable this property is, and why you're selling it, and how long?
Again, my name is Matthew Moore. I'm the Director of Capital Planning and Facilities for the Community College System of New Hampshire. And we have come to realize that with enrollment dropping and the use of our education and combining with the university system at Keene, we have moved into many of the classrooms at Keene State and utilize them, so we have no further need for the building.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Thank you. Okay, now if we could go on to people who might be in favor of this application. I don't know who to pick on first, so why don't you self-select? I don't know, gentlemen, if you might like to have other people sit at the table.
I think these microphones work a little better, too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Chris Coates. I am actually on the Keene Housing Commission, and I'm actually the chair of the commission. So just need to look at my notes. Here they are. May I just start off just quickly saying thank you for your thoughtful process. I'm also on the board of 100 Nights, so thank you very much for your thoughtful process and decision around that. I sit on multiple committees in my other job that I do as county administrator, trying to figure out housing, not just in Keene, but throughout Cheshire County. And it's a discussion we constantly are looking at and discussing and trying to figure out how we address this need, because it's beyond crisis level. In New Hampshire is within the top 3 of graying states, and Cheshire County is in the top 3 of graying counties as in aging. And individuals are looking for, because of limited income, whatever it may be, are looking for different opportunities for housing. You know, when River Valley Community College decided to move on to the Keene State College campus, we as a commission decided to really explore the opportunity of purchasing this building. Because we knew the need. We're hearing about the need on a regular basis in our meetings, and always looking to see how we can do whatever we can to address those needs. I see this as what we call a twofer project. By us adding 60 units, we're also possibly loosening up other housing in the community for others to then attain. So it's really a win-win for everybody in our community. We are good stewards and good neighbors of our properties. If you look at any of them, I want to say I'm also a neighbor because I live on 30 Gilsum Street, and so it's right around the corner from me. And we take it very seriously that the need to ensure that not just for the sake of the neighbors, but also the individuals that choose our housing, that they feel comfortable and feel welcomed in the housing that they're living in, and it's a positive experience for them. You know, we did meet with the butters, and it's important for us because in any project we do, and I was on the board initially for 9 years prior, and now this is my second time around on the commission, and I'm about my 3rd year in, and we've had multiple projects. We start a conversation with the community that we're affecting, and we continue that conversation, and it's something that we will have other conversations where they hear their concerns, hear where what they're excited about, to see if we can build off that. And as any project, we promise to walk with those that are being effective and really to address those issues. That's all I'm going to say. I know there's others here that want to address it too, but we're really excited by this opportunity. I will tell you on a personal note, I don't like anything about this building because it's Roosevelt School and I was a Lincoln School kid. And we lost to them in the city finals of floor hockey when I was in 4th grade, and I still am working through that.
Thank you. Were there any questions for Mr. Coates? All right, so would anybody else like to speak in favor of the application? You could just state your name and address.
Okay, Hannah, 24 Vernon Street. Hello, my name is Hannah, and I reside at 24 Vernon Street. I'm currently staying at Monadnock Peer Support in their Step Up, Step Down program. I believe it will be very beneficial to build this affordable housing project. I'm currently facing homelessness due to my stepfather illegally taking my mother's name off the mortgage. We are facing homelessness under no fault of our own. The MPS program is currently housing me until April 26th. After that, I have nowhere else to go. Adding this building will greatly affect many people who are in the similar situations as I. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you.
I'm Trish Lane from Monadnock. I'm tearing up a little bit, sorry. I'm Trish Lane from Monadnock Peer Support. I hear a lot of these stories. I do groups. I know a lot of people who are looking for housing, and sometimes my groups turn into a housing discussion because there's so many people who need it. So I'm very passionate about this topic, and that's why I'm here. And she's very brave to come up here. I came up to support her. I know a lot of stories like this where people really just need a place to live, and they can be very depressed about it. I try to encourage people to keep trying and to keep hope. This is some hope what you're doing, so I really appreciate what you're doing here. If you approve this, I would love to see it happen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak in favor?
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name's Madeline Ulrich. I'm the Executive Director of New Hampshire Care Collaborative, formerly known as Monadnock Collaborative, and prior to that was Pilot Health. So we've had a few name changes. Most of you might have heard of Service Link, which is one of our programs that we house and support the Department of Health and Human Services, who really runs that program. So all of the programs that are at New Hampshire Care Collaborative are working with individuals who are seeking, or who are going on to long-term care and need various options to remain aging in place at home. And as you know, when if you looked at what the rents are out there, and when you have folks who have been own their own home, possibly, and have worked their entire life until they go to retire, and then can no longer afford it. So we spend a good portion of our time working with the aging and the disabled and veterans in the community. It's very challenging trying to come up and find housing for folks, and pretty depressing. And kudos to who was just on, because I think they really said it very well. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak in favor? Yes.
I'm Laura Tobin. I live on Center Street. Sorry. I recently started a new position in marketing, and it's interesting how marketing has taken a transition, because my primary goal with marketing now is not to sell a product, it's to find employees. But unfortunately, we can't find employees because they can't afford to live here, because there's not enough housing. And so I think that there is a tendency sometimes to think about these places, building new housing and converting maybe old schools into housing as, could be either bringing people in or giving people something that they haven't earned or worked for. But the truth is that the impact to the community by not providing housing for people, it makes the community unsustainable. People like Hannah, who just said that she wasn't going to have a place to go. There are jobs for her, but how do you think about looking for a job when you don't have a place to live? and that becomes your number one priority, you can't function. And I've been in that situation. I'm actually still technically on the wait list for Keene Housing. I don't necessarily need it right now, but it's not that I can't work. I just was working so hard at finding housing that that was my job. Where this building is, it might be easy to miss this, but not too far from there, there's another large apartment building. So that's where people who work downtown, who live, who go to school at Antioch, they might stay there. In between, there is, I think, in between that section, there's a gas station, a laundromat. The area near this building has recently been, it's been sort of the focus of some development already. So this kind of feels like a natural transition in that sense. It's also easy in terms of access to schools and hospitals, which I mention because nurses and teachers don't make, a lot of them would qualify for Keene Housing services, and unfortunately, and Josh can speak to this a little bit more, but my understanding is that the wait list, it's not just a matter of who comes first. You have to, certain people who have disabilities or limitations, they come first, which makes sense, but it also means that those nurses and teachers who will be needed a lot more in the upcoming years, they don't have a place to go. Childcare workers, that's another big challenge right now, but childcare workers, the kind of the path of that, people can't go back to work because they don't have childcare. People are stopped entering into childcare as a career. It's not feasible because those workers make $11 to $15 an hour. So I think just kind of considering the populations that we're talking about, these are the people who are making this community work. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Bordenay. I live at 22 Woodbury Street. I've lived there since 1991. My first experience with this property was bringing my daughter to the playground, and there was a merry-go-round there. We spent many hours on the playground. But I've seen businesses come and go. There was the American Gymnastics School there. There was TNT. There have been businesses there, and the last involved business was the community college. I would like to see a stable use of this building, our property. And I'm really excited about this project. I'm hoping that the zoning board will approve the waivers and that we will be able to move forward, or the housing authority will be able to move forward. And one of the things is, I was at the Butters meeting the other night, and the first question I had was, what about the retaining wall? That we have been looking for the city to do something about that retaining wall and the guardrail that sits on top of it for years with no movement by either the city or by the school. Already, the possible next owners have made an agreement with the school and the city to take care of that issue before they even take the property. So I support it full-heartedly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dylan Benek. I live at 635 West Street. I'm also the president of People's Linen Service. We own the property located at 44 George Street, 427 Washington Street, and my partner Dave owns 451 Washington Street and 463 Washington Street, which I think is a multi-unit commercial space. We are fully in favor of this. I look at that building every day and wish it was developed somehow into housing specifically. We looked at briefly trying to figure out a way to do it ourselves, but that was not possible as a private entity, especially with how it's zoned and all these other obstacles. So when we heard about this a few weeks ago, it was exciting. We have staff that needs housing. We recently just renovated 427 Washington Street to provide to our staff because the inventory of just single-family homes to purchase in Keene is far, far below normal levels. The inventory for regular market rate housing is really, really low. And the inventory for, as you've already heard tonight, affordable housing is non-existent. I mean, that's how far the wait is. So that's our perspective from Peoples and the properties nearby. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ken Cost, 79 Ridgewood. First, thank the board for listening to this in such detail. We talk about housing constantly in this room. There's housing studies that are being done. Southwest Regional Planning Commission is doing housing studies. So I don't think we have to go into the need. It was expressed really clearly about the absolute need. I really perked up when I heard the architect was talking about 90 units, because I think the more dense, the better, because we could use land very, very efficiently and build more housing. I understand that's not happening here, but 60 is wonderful. There's absolutely no downside to this project. I would hope that zoning isn't something that becomes a blocking point to it. This project is everything we heard about. It's reusing an existing building that's been standing vacant. We just heard some neighbors who are in favor of the project. It fills a need, just a dire need in the community. Keene Housing has done an outstanding job identifying it. They put the package together. They found a willing seller. They're a willing buyer. So there's just nothing here that is going to be causing any issues, but it's just partly solving a major problem. So I'm also part of the Monadnock Interfaith Project. We look at housing a lot, and so I'm personally then very much in favor of this project. Thinks it's an outstanding solution, and I hope we can find many more like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Phil Wyzek. I live at 15 Base Hill Road in Keene. I'm also the CEO of Monadnock Family Services here in Keene. We're a non-profit mental health center that serves about 1,300 people on a given month. Most of them live in the Keene area. Our mission is to take care of people with long-term mental health conditions or kids with severe emotional disturbance. I can only, support all the speakers that you've heard before me to say how wonderful this project is, and I would echo their voice by saying it's extremely worthwhile. We at MFS see people struggling with housing every day. We see people doing their level best to regain their health who are living in squalor. They're living in squalor because they have no other place to do. We also see every day about 30 individuals who are living in tents in the greater Keene area. At the last point in time survey of homelessness, our PATH outreach worker counted 30 tents in January trying to suffer through a New Hampshire winter. So as people have said before me, the need for housing is great. I can also tell you that as an employer, currently we have 185 employees. As an employer, some people reject my job offers to come here because they can't find housing. whether it be someone at a very entry level, position earning $16 an hour, $17 an hour, or a highly skilled professional earning six figures. They turn down the jobs because they can't find stuff. So this project is not a solution to everything, but adding 60 units of affordable housing, in my book, is significant. I would like to also say a few things that people haven't said so far. That for individuals suffering with any kind of health condition, physical health problems or mental health issues, on top of that, struggling with poverty, right, they have a double whammy. And it's pretty clear in some of the literature I read that as you struggle with poverty, every day your stresses continue, your burdens continue, your worries continue. The cumulative effect of that is traumatic. It changes the way you live your life, your way that your brain thinks. So if we, have once upon a time thought we would be the healthiest community in healthy Monadnock, remember that? We know we need to address the effects of trauma, and that is also related to poverty. And the other thing I think that people have talked to you about is this project within the public interest? Well, it seems, I don't know about this stuff, but it seems to me it's solving a problem for the university system of New Hampshire. That's in the public interest. The seller wants to sell it. And it's creating these beds for us in the region, which solves a problem. There's one more problem it solves. I think we can say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Keene Housing Authority produces wonderful environments for people to live in. If you walk through any of their properties or visit them, they're nice places to live. And I think and the people living there, therefore, experience dignity. And I think having people live in dignity is in the public interest. So I would suggest that we do everything possible to help this project succeed, and if there's something else that we can do to create more housing of all types, would be helpful. Please give this some serious consideration, and thank you.
Thank you. I know it's getting long, so if people want to say something, fine, but let's try not to have too much repetition.
Is anybody in favor of it? What about? I'm Eric Willis, 1993, May, Shamrock Real Estate, Margaret and Illinois, showed me the property I bought at 18 Woodbury Street. Walked me out back of the property and said, you'll never have houses close to you. And I found it funny tonight where we talked about good neighbors. And now I talked to Josh, and he's not gonna be my neighbor, but he's saying what my neighbors are gonna be. I have 72 windows with 30 units, 2 stories high in my backyard. As Chris pointed out in a meeting we had at Stone Arch the other week, he's on Gilsum Street, and we gotta make sure when he gets out of the shower, he puts his clothes on. He's got one house on each side of him, and we have 30 units. Whether they're 1 bedroom or 2 bedrooms are irrelevant. But 30 units, and as you brought up, how far from the line is that first building gonna be? And then there's a lot of what ifs of that first building. It's gonna be built first, and then the main building, you would think would be addressed first. And I understand, they wanna take care of the construction staging out front. But it seems to me they're trying to jam a big square peg in a very small round hole. And if things don't go the way they hope, they're gonna have to reapply for the first building again. It's gonna be still sitting there. So I'd like them to reconsider, use that first building. That's great use of the property. But the second building right on the line, 2 stories high, 30 units, that doesn't seem like it's being very neighborly considerate in a place that isn't zoned for 60 units and 30 of them right on my back line with 2 stories high and 72 windows in my backyard now. And as far as right now, if they use the existing building, go up another 1 or 2 floors, get whatever they need to change for that, that's great. That building's already there, and it could be repurposed for what they're trying to do, and that would be great. And right now, they can drive a fire truck all the way around the building. But if they put that building in the very back, that's gonna be, 10 feet from the tree line? Probably 10 feet? From the property line. And it's gonna be all soft material back there, no road. Right, so the fire truck can't get back to that two-story building in Keene in the back of it. So to me, that's a weakness. Where I watch them, the fire department, when they bring in a new ladder and they brought it out back, I've watched them out there, doing their testing of the new ladders out back, and I just thought, boy, that's, if they ever went up with that building, they could still get all the way around it. So that's my concern, is stuffing this first building in with a lot of what-ifs for that existing building they're not gonna touch till they put the first one in right up against my line, 10 feet away from it, 2 stories high, 30 units, when it's not even zoned for that. And just since 1993, I've been there and enjoying it, and as my realtor, Margaret Lanot, told me years ago, I would never have to worry about this. Not that it was chiseled in stone, but it was one of the things, we considered when we bought the place. And I've seen, they talk about how you can't use nothing there, as far as a single-family home. We've seen a lot of places operate out of there. Keene School operated out of there, the TNT School, the School of Gymnastics, was that community further education? So there's, offices and other things that can be used for that building. But I don't see why they couldn't go ahead with what they're doing and just change their plans and do away with that back building and put more use to the front building, the existing building that's already there. And if for some reason you guys gotta approve this, I'd hope that they would consider putting in, like you saw when before Liberty Mutual bought the Peerless building on Maple Ave. Peerless bought my stepfather's former house, Phil Amers. It's a little house right on the right corner of Peerless. They put in a big berm of soil, then they put arborvitaes on top of it to give a little privacy barrier. And, a fence behind that, if you guys decide to go through it would be nice to, put a stipulation in for something like that. I'm talking 30 units right on my property line. And there's no guarantee. They're saying what it usually attracts is elderly and disabled. And then there's all the talk, does it depreciate your value? Well, I've never seen anybody seek out a house specifically to be by government or city-funded housing projects. Never. My house had electric heat in it when I bought it in 1993. I took out the electric heat and put in, System 2000 baseboard hot water. As far as values, is this housing project gonna affect their values? Well, just as an example, on the baseboard hot water, I thought, I increased the value. So I called the bank and talked to the appraiser, and they laughed at me. They says, no, the house had a heating system in it when I bought it. It was electric. They says, I ain't gonna up the value, I'm just increasing the sellability. Well, that's what I see for the surrounding properties, is it might not drop the value a lot, but it will affect the sellabilities of them. So in a sense, that does, in a roundabout way, affect the value.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have to push the button? Okay. Hi, I'm Dante Diffendale. I currently reside in the Step Up, Step Down program at 20 Vernon Street, which is Monadnock Area Peer Support Agency. I've been homeless since 2019. I have been able to stay in Keene by living on people's couches and by going to MPS and living in a tent. At this present time, both with my physical, medical conditions and my mental health, I will not survive being homeless. I almost didn't survive the last time I was in a tent. And the last time I was in the tent was in the summer. Thankfully, I had somebody who did not tell her landlord that she let me move in to her house because I cannot be outside in the winter. At the end of my stay at MPS, I very might have to leave Keene. I moved up here in 2008 because everything was cheaper and I loved Keene. I still love Keene. I love the small town feeling. I love the local shops. I love being able to walk pretty much anywhere I need to go. I don't want to have to leave here. Being homeless, you can't save money to get an apartment. You can't save money for a security deposit. You can't save money for first and last month's rent. You can't even save money to furnish an apartment Being homeless is expensive, more expensive than people realize. So I have absolutely zero savings. I'm on the Keene Housing waiting list. I've been on it for close to 3 years now. I will have to leave Keene in the middle of April because I have nowhere else to go. While this project will not help me, because it's still a long ways away according to the timelines that was stated earlier, I moved up here to attend Keene State College. I fell in love with Keene. I fell in love with the people, the atmosphere, the embodiment of what Keene means, small town city. I'm originally from New Jersey. In New Jersey, where I lived, you can't walk down Main Street and say hi to a complete stranger and them actually say hi back. You can do that in Keene. That was one of the biggest things. I moved up here knowing that I was going to go into Keene State and that I was going to leave. I fell in love with this place. I don't want to have to leave.
Thank you. So is there anybody else who wanted to speak either in favor or opposed to the applications? Hearing none, then I will close the public hearing and we can perhaps deliberate. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you like to have the applicant rebut any of the opposition?
That's probably a very good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the, and I do appreciate your comments, really. I do. I think they're well-informed. I think you. Yeah. I appreciate the discussion. I do. You heard me speak earlier about trying to figure out which variances to go for or not go for because of this unique property. So, building up versus building out, there are restrictions on building up in this district of being 2 stories. So we're stuck with 2 stories unless we got a variance to go with height. And then there's the question of whether the building can support that kind of height in its construction. And again, we have our financing problem of doing 30 units at a time. So it really doesn't lend itself to go up rather than out. And, the issue of, for this board, as this board is aware, is whether to permit the multifamily housing, not to design it, but whether to permit the 60 unit and the variance from the limitation on single family development or single family use. So it's not a question of that issue, as this board is aware, is for the planning board to determine as far as the design elements of it. So we looked at, really did consider going up, and we certainly welcome more discussion with neighbors about privacy interests and how to develop the property to respect neighbors' privacy, because I think those are well-informed points. And Josh is always available to discuss that, and that's why we had the roundtable with the neighbors before coming to this board, as to sort of address those issues. So the sole question isn't whether we need housing in Keene. I think it's pretty clear we need housing in Keene. But I think it informs every one of the elements that you have to decide on here. And I think that it outweighs the risk of harm that would be on the other side of those equations for each one of those elements. I mean, you heard People's Linen say they looked at the property and couldn't do what we're trying to do with that property. So it really speaks to the hardship and the uniqueness of this property and the difficulty of trying to develop this. So I'd also ask the board to look at the provisions I cited from the master plan about being creative with the need for housing. The planning board, I don't have to tell you, the planning department does a heck of a job. I don't have to tell you that, but they can't look at every single individual property when they're drawing a zoning map. And this project didn't exist at that time. So, and we try to avoid spot zoning, I get all that. But this is a unique opportunity for the city, and I think it's a reasonable request under the circumstances, the unique circumstances of this particular lot. And I appreciate everybody coming out to speak in favor and against and share opinion in some civil discourse here. Any question? Anything you want to add, Josh?
Well, just to reiterate, I really appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate how much it means for everybody to come out and spend time. It's hard to come into a public setting like this and talk about these things, so I do appreciate it. And I especially appreciate being the only person saying, no, we don't like this, when everybody else is.
I don't like it.
I totally get it. I totally do.
I'm 200% for that front building.
Okay,
Yeah.
gentlemen, could we,
I understand, thank you. So I do want to acknowledge that and reiterate what Adam said, that we would be more than happy to work with any abutters who have concerns about the proximity and how we might accommodate them to feel more comfortable. And then the last thing I'll say is, I do understand the desire to have us just do the one building by some, but I want to reiterate that it's financially, it'd be very, very difficult for us to move forward with this project if we can't do it at 60 units, as we've suggested.
thank you. Does the board have any questions of anybody? Yes, Mr. Gordon.
Just one for Josh. The 30 units in the existing building, you would walk away from?
I don't know. We'd have to get back with the person who helps us find the money and do some really difficult math. So I couldn't say, I
Best
can't.
guess.
That's, we would try to figure out a way to make it work, but it would be very difficult.
It
and
would become much less likely.
Much less likely, yeah, absolutely.
Second part of that question. Yeah, I guess I'll let that one go. You've already answered it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the board have any questions? All right, so maybe now I'll close the public hearing. And
Thank
we
you.
can move to deliberations. Now, we really need to vote on these separately, as they are two separate ordinances. Or ordinances, variances, sorry, guys. So perhaps we can, however, just, discuss what your feelings are and your thoughts on the various criteria, and then we can have separate motions.
Sounds good.
So the first criteria would be whether or not this is in the public interest. Mr. Welch.
Yes, I guess I'd like to say I'm very appreciative of the fact that the applicant has gone into the master plan for documentation of public interest as well as the code itself. And I think they've made a fairly compelling case that the master plan does look for relief from Keene's housing problem from projects like this. And also they've documented the need for housing of this sort. So I think they've done a good job showing that it wouldn't be contrary to the public interest.
Anybody else? Yeah, I would just say on that, it was very, I appreciate the references to the master plan, and especially for the public interest criteria. However, that's not the ordinance. A master plan, even if the planning board and the council approve it, it's still advisory. Anybody else have a comment on whether it's in the public interest? If the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. Comments? Nobody?
Once again, I'll jump in. I do think that it is a reasonable connection in the spirit of the ordinance to talk about the possibility of other multifamily units in this district that can't be utilized because it doesn't lend itself to conservation residential development. So I think that, the spirit of multifamily dwellings is there, even if it's not technically available without a variance in this instance. Again, I'd also, the spirit of the ordinance is something that comes from, and I'll refer back to the master plan, even if it's not written in. And there, I think it's in agreement and concurrence.
Yes.
Again, I think it was pointed out that we've got a lot that is unique in terms of when all the zoning was done, it was either in some way exempt or was used in a completely different way than anything close by. It was the one school, and then, currently owned by the state. So again, it's not something that our zoning touches. So it's always been sort of outside the zoning ordinances just because of its existence. So applying it, solely by a zoning ordinance would be kind of tricky in my view. I think again, because it's a unique situation, it has to be looked at in a little bit different way than just straightforward. It's within a zoning place.
We're all awake now.
Yeah, we are. So anyway, that's my observation of it.
Mr. Gorman, do you have a comment?
I just go back to the attorney's point, about zoning being sort of a broader brush and not wanting to have sort of pocket of individual properties that are sort of subtracted from the bigger picture. And I just think that's the case here. And, the ordinance is drafted to prevent certain things from happening in a neighborhood, but in this particular instance, it probably wasn't drafted with a school that already exists in mind. So I think it is within the spirit of the ordinance to find a good purpose for this property and one that can benefit the greater good. So.
Thank you. Granting the variance would do substantial justice because well, I'll jump in and say that it seems to me that there is, we've had certainly a great deal of testimony regarding the need for housing, and in my opinion, that is meets the criteria for substantial justice, and the outweighs any, with all due respect, outweighs any potential detriment to individual property owners. Yes.
I agree with everything that you said, Attorney Taylor. That does not diminutize the concerns of the abutter in my mind. So I will say, relative to this and what I would consider a just outcome for all parties, I would be seeking some sort of stipulation for privacy screening along that boundary.
I think that's a good suggestion, because if you didn't make it, I would. Anybody else? Mr. Welsh?
Yes, I was thinking about the privacy screening and concerns of that sort that have been raised. And I was just wondering what we can do. We can attach a condition that's incumbent on the planning board as they consider the specifics of this application later?
Well, in the past, we've put a provision in place. We've used fairly loose language and tied it to planning board approval. I believe that's how we've done it in the
Right,
past.
yeah, I think that's an allowable condition, and as Mr. Gorman said, we've put that type of condition on variances previously. So if the variance were granted, the values of surrounding properties would not be diminished. Mr. Gorman?
You know, this is a case where the current situation is probably diminutizing neighborhood property values, where in fact the development of this property, in my opinion, is going to raise property values. A vacant building, to me, in my experience, for whatever that's worth, is about the utmost detriment to a neighborhood that you can have. And I think that there was fact presented as well that, you know, maybe what we think low-income housing does to a neighborhood isn't actually the case. So that further supports my sentiment that this will not diminutize property values.
Anybody else? Mr. Welsh?
I'd go along with that, and I always appreciate it when applicants provide information of some sort on this question to help us out, and I think that the article, even though it's about Alexandria, is useful and worth bringing in. I also think that it's worth considering that there's similar existing uses in the area that don't diminutize property values and that also enhance opportunities and overall property value. So I'm less concerned about that.
Okay, and moving on to, as they say, the big one, unnecessary hardship. Owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship. Mr. Gorman?
Well, I think it's a giant brick school, an amazing amount of square footage on a 2-point-something acre lot that can either be a community garden, a single-family home, or a telecommunications facility. So I think that embodies hardship. That's all I got.
Mr. Clough?
I completely agree. There's not a lot of choices there with a building that doesn't seem suitable for any of them.
Mr. Welsh?
It seems like neighbors and others have exerted their imaginations on this one for a while and come up blank. And this is maybe the best use, most likely use that we've heard.
Right, and it may be, well, I think that goes to the reasonableness, which is the next part of the equation. But I think that, in my view, the hardship comes with where the lot is, the size of the lot, the monolith, that's the building that's on it. And I believe that that in itself creates a hardship, taking all the other factors into account. Anybody else? Okay, if there's no further comment from the board, perhaps we can vote on the two variances, take them one at a time. If I could have a motion for ZBA 2306. Mr. Gorman.
I'll make a motion for ZBA 2306 with condition of a privacy barrier along the, which?
Yes, Ms.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair. The
Bedford.
the findings of fact that you just discussed,
Yes.
would that be for ZBA 2306 or for both of the variances?
I think we were discussing it pertaining to both variances,
Okay.
but we're going to vote separately on
Okay.
each variance.
All right, thank you.
Would it be appropriate as we get into the second variance, if any of the finding of fact changes in our view, we can just make note of that on each
Yes.
condition?
Yes,
On e-
unless
on
you
e-
want to sit here and go through them all again.
I do not want to.
Oh, okay.
So where I was a motion to approve ZBA 23-06 with the condition of privacy screening, subject to planning board approval on the southwest line of the property.
Mr. Gorman, if I could, we're
Attorney
just
Taylor.
double checking to make sure we have the coordinates right for the
Great.
screening.
Thank you.
Northeasterly boundary.
So, not southwest.
The opposite.
Yeah. The
North-
northeast,
east.
clarify.
Just for, Madam Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
to keep it easy for record keeping and for us in when we have to enforce it, of which one we were trying to make sure it's along, if we can determine if it was the front setback, the side setback, or the rear setback.
Be aside, he's over here further up on Woodbury Street, so abutting there.
Okay.
Washington Street, it's all the way in the very back of the new building.
So,
Correct.
okay, so it's the side setback on the northeast side of the property.
Thank you.
If you're not confused now.
Okay, is the board clear
Yes.
on what the condition is?
Is staff clear? Is that adequate? Great, okay.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we are down to voting, if I don't mess this up. 1, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. All those in favor? Oops. If the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. All those in favor? 4-0. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. All those in favor? If the variance were granted...
Attorney Taylor, just for the record, do you want to state the count?
Oh, I'm sorry. So far it's 4-0, thank you. You can tell I don't do this very often. Anyway, 4, if the variance were granted, the values of surrounding properties would not be diminished. All those in favor? Okay, 4 in favor, none opposed. Then number 5, owing to the special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. And the proposed use is a reasonable one. All in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. So on the entire motion to approve application 23-06, all those in favor? 4 in favor and none opposed, so that variance is granted.
Thank you.
So now we have to go on to ZBA 2307. So I should ask, considering Mr. Gorman's request, does anybody have any differing comments on any of the criteria for this particular one regarding impervious surface, less green building coverage, and less green open space than's required by the ordinance? Yes, Mr.
I
Gorman.
would just say specifically that my narrative would change slightly on number 5, just because I think some of the hardships that encompass the existing building do change with the addition of the second building, and that's probably what's creating the need for the less impervious surfaces, as well as that situation leading to parking, which we will get to. But specifically with the impervious surfaces, I would restate my position on the hardship to be just that this project is unlikely to ever happen if it doesn't happen with these measures in place. And if it is unlikely to ever happen, then we come back to the same hardship of having a property that can't have a really viable use. So I think for just the sake of viability, that is the essence of the hardship on this second application.
Anybody else? In that case, could I have a motion on ZBA 23-07, 438 Washington Street? Mr. Gorman?
I'll move that we approve 23-07, I guess without condition, since the condition is already placed on the first variance.
Okay, is that adequate for the minute taker, or do we need to read the whole thing into the record? Okay, thank you. Mr. Clough? I'll second. Okay. Mr. Clough is seconding it. And we get to go through the criteria so you can see it in your sleep when you go home tonight. Number one, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. If the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. All in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. If the variance were granted, the values of surrounding properties would not be diminished. All in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. And finally, owing to the special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship. All in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. And finally, the use is reasonable. All in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. So voting on the full motion, all those in favor of 23-07, 438 Washington Street. All those in favor? 4 in favor and none opposed. The variance is granted. Thank you.
Thank you.
So onward, ZBA 2308, again, 438 Washington Street. Petitioner requests a special exception from the parking requirements to allow less than 2 spaces per unit per Chapter 100, Articles 9.2.6, 9.2.7, and Table 9-1 of the zoning regulations. Staff, you're on.
So as part of that special exception process, it's under section 25(8.7). None of the criteria has changed, or it's the same property, so I don't know if you want me to go over that again. There is that portion within the ordinance that allows for you to up to 51% would, 49% for the special exception, so.
Could you go over what the parking requirements are?
Absolutely, give me 1 second. So it's under section 9.2.7, reduction of required parking spaces. And under that, under section C of that is major reduction requests. Requests for reduction is required parking that exceeds 10% and are less than 50% shall be considered by the Zoning Board of Adjustment through the special exception process. And determining whether to grant the special exception, the Zoning Board of Adjustment shall make the following findings in addition to those required for the special exception. A, the specific use or site has such characteristics that the number of required parking spaces is too restrictive. And B, the required reduction will not cause long-term parking problems for adjacent properties or anticipated future use.
So was the application correct, though, that the buildings, if they're built out in the anticipated configuration, would be 120 spaces? I think that was what was in the application.
That would be what's required.
That's the required
Okay,
parking.
all right.
Yep.
And the one additional question that I had for you was in the provision of 9.2.9 on the remote parking, because that was brought up in the application. That remote, Section A, remote parking spaces shall be within 1,000 feet walking distance of the property in which the principal use is located. Does that apply to the major reduction request?
So that would be part of the administrative portion of things. If they're seeking the section C, which is the major reduction portion, so they're asking for that exception to the required parking spaces. They're required to have 120. They're looking to have 70 on site or reduce it down to 70. Does that help answer your question?
Oh, I'm
Chair?
curious as to how off-site parking, if it's needed, gets handled, and
I think at this point, that would be left up to the applicant to explain why they're going for a variance and not asking for off-site parking if they can find it somewhere. That's what they could explain.
I guess what I'm asking is whether that's an additional requirement if you don't have enough parking.
It is an option. They chose not to take that option.
Mr. Gorman.
It's my understanding that the applicant has sort of two avenues to proceed with. One being this one, which is to apply for a variance, whereby the need for off-site would not even come to play. However, if this board rejects not the variance, my apologies, but the special exception, if this board rejects the special exception application, the applicant could then in turn take their variance for the 90 units to city staff with off-site parking accommodations and get approval that way. Is that correct?
That is correct. There is another section, number 3, that I didn't read, but basically they submitted that in order to go for the special exception, explaining that one is to describe the proposed use, the days and hours of operation and use, the anticipated number of employees, and then the availability of nearby on-street parking or alternative modes or transportation, public, anticipated peak. So there's a whole additional set of criteria that needs to be provided, which is that parking analysis or which they provided as part of this path.
Okay, well, I know I didn't see even the summary in my packet, so I'm kind of, in the dark as to what was in it. So I don't know, was it in the packet? Because it wasn't in my packet. So it was, it was kind of like I'm reading this application, and it keeps referencing a summary of a parking study, and I'm going, really? So I assume it's out there somewhere. So,
We
anyway.
we do have a copy of it, if you'd like
Well,
to see.
yeah, I'm just, when there's something like that that's so pertinent to an application, it really needs to be provided to the board. In any event, any other questions for staff? Seeing none, we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Adam Caseta, again, for Monadnock Affordable Housing Corporation with Josh Meehan to my right. I'm sorry that you didn't get a copy of the parking, the summary of the parking study. What is interesting in this parking study is that it's informed a lot by the data that Keene Housing has generated and found that it is not using the parking that it has. I will answer your question that you had earlier about whether we were pursuing a remote parking special exception. We're not at this point. We're only pursuing the request for a major reduction so that we could have 70 spaces rather than the 120 that are required by, I think it's table 911 or something like that. So what Keene Housing found in surveying properties like this one is that they have empty parking lots all over town, is what they found. So we put in there that we have these spaces available if we need them that are also on city bus, but that really isn't the gist of it. That's just to sort of to demonstrate the issue that we have parking spaces at properties that are 2 spaces per unit. We just don't use them. So in trying to balance, and I won't go back into too much of what we've talked about, we're balancing a lot of different interests within the ordinance here, height, coverage, parking, and what we found is that this is an area where we can peel back on parking because we don't need it. We don't want to have unused parking spaces. We'd rather have housing units. So that's really what's informing this request. And also, we're only dealing with a 2.4 acre lot, so we don't have that much space to work with, and we don't want to eat it up with a bunch of parking. So I won't read my application to you, but I'll hit some of the high points here. And what we have is that we're asking for 70 spaces, or permission to have just 70 spaces as opposed to 120 spaces. This is something that's specifically allowed within the zoning ordinances. It permits it. It's by special exception, of course. So that's up to this board. So it's contemplated by the zoning ordinance. One of the things that's unique, that was surprising to me in finding in the parking study is that we're going to have less traffic than when this was used as a school. Because if you have 200 students coming in and out of that building during the course of the day, there's a lot of vehicular traffic. Whereas if you have 60 residential units, people come, they park, they leave their vehicle. So it's actually going to increase, we think, safety and would require less parking than what was there before. So so that's really sort of struck me as part of this, and it goes to the element of endangering public health, safety, and welfare by permitting this special exception, and I'd suggest that it doesn't. The purpose is well established, maintained, and operated so as to be harmonious with the surrounding areas and not impede development, use, or enjoyment of adjacent properties. We don't anticipate spilling off into the side streets or needing any on-street parking. Keene Housing found that it's like, what, 0.8 spaces per unit on average?
It depends on the property, but we look specifically at properties that will have a similar distribution by bedroom size as what we hope to build at the school. And this summarizes basically demand ratio. For every unit you have, how many parking permits do you give out? Because to park in any of our lots as a resident, you need to come to the property manager and give them your registration and everything's up to date, and then you get a parking sticker. So we're able to very accurately track how many spots we actually get used versus how many we have. So just quickly, another property of ours that looks very similar in terms of the distribution of bedroom sizes. This is a property that's 22% 2 beds rather than 25%, and the remaining are 1-bedroom units. Right now, we have 18 parking permits for 45 spaces. So 55% is the demand ratio. The demand ratio is 0.55. And I won't belabor this other than to say similarly, on a much larger scale, Harper Acres, which anybody who's been down Castle Street knows Harper Acres well, 112 units, the majority of which are one-bedrooms. There's one building that are larger units. At Harper Acres, again, 112 units. We have 102 spaces and 55 parking permits. 0.49 is the demand ratio there. And I'm not picking the two low-hanging fruit. I can go through, we've got lots of data that support that that's around what our demand looks like for properties with this distribution by bedroom size.
Yes, Ms. Barker?
Thank you. My apologies. The traffic study was submitted. It was missed in entering into the packet. I can certainly make copies and provide them to you. If we want to take a 5-minute break, I can do that. I can get them for you.
Well, I think we can have the applicant summarize the summary.
Sure. Be happy to. So just clicking through the issues for your consideration, one of the things you heard Jonathan Halley mention is that we're relocating the exit curb cut to be directly across from George Street, because that actually is a safer way to have egress. Is when when a driveway's kitty corner across from you, you don't know who's going next, but when you're straight ahead, it's a little easier to determine. So we're increasing safety, we think, by doing that. We won't be the reduction in parking won't produce more noise, odors, glare, or vibration. As I said, we're going to be reducing the amount of traffic that is in this building compared to its use as a school with 200 students. And again, we expect to have more than enough parking with 70 spaces based upon data from the parking study and from the Keene Housing has generated by surveying its properties and permits. We won't place an excessive burden on public improvements or facilities. There is a bus stop right up the street at Citizens Way. We may have some people use that city bus rather than driving downtown and clogging up parking. So I don't think that's a burden, actually. That's a benefit to be that close to a bus stop. And again, we don't expect to be pouring off onto the street. And what extra space we've had, we're dedicating to landscaping and a privacy shield. There won't be a destruction or loss or damage to any features that's determined to be of significant natural, scenic, or historic importance. We're going to preserve this building that's there, and otherwise there isn't anything that's going to be replaced with pavement that would be otherwise historic importance. And again, we're trying to do less coverage as opposed to more. We're trying to reduce the amount of parking. And as I've already mentioned, it isn't going to be a traffic hazard or a substantial increase because we're actually asking to reduce the number of vehicles permitted in there. And then these other elements that Mr. Hagan mentioned about the specific use or site has a characteristic that the number of parking spaces is too restrictive. We can't fit 120 spaces there with this plan and this proposed project because the lot is only 2.4 acres. And the requested reduction will not cause long-term parking problems for adjacent properties or anticipated future uses. No, and in my application I've spelled these out, what's going on with each of the comparable properties in the city. We expect, and luckily Keene Housing has very accurate data because it controls the parking permits, and it's, if you ask for one, you're going to get one. And they don't need to issue them for the spaces that they have. So we don't expect to be pouring out onto the street or impacting other uses. The other elements are in the parking study, a description of the proposed uses. So the proposed use is going to be for these 70 spaces to serve 60 units. Their majority, remember, one bedroom units. 75% of them will be one bedroom units. And most of those, if they do have a car at all, would only have one vehicle. Days in operation of the uses, this is residential, so typically somebody comes in and leaves once a day with their vehicle midweek. Anticipated number of employees and daily number of customers and clients, well, we're talking about 60 units. Primarily single family, single bedroom. How many residents do you think you might have there?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, pretty close to 60, except for the 2 beds, so.
You can turn your mic on.
sorry, maybe 90. I mean, it's hard to say.
Right,
but
and then you
around
have a
90
property
probably.
manager.
We'll have a property manager, and as well as we have resident service coordinators and a community gardener, none of whom are there full-time all day, but pop in for programming.
The rate of turnover of the proposed spaces, as I indicated, it's residential use, so there's not going to be a lot of turnover of those spaces. People will use the spot and they'll have a permit to use them, so we'll control the number of spaces there. And then there is the question of availability of on-street parking or alternative modes of transportation. As I mentioned, we have a bus stop at Citizens Way, and I think there is on-street parking on Washington Street, is that right? Yeah, on Washington Street there is there, but again, I don't anticipate that we would need it. And the anticipated peak parking and traffic loads for each of the uses on the site, well, there's only one use on the site, and that's going to be residential. And the peak, according to the parking study, where is this? He says over and over that the proposed affordable housing, 60 units. Peak demand will be 59 occupied spaces, so that 70 stalls is more than sufficient. And total vehicle movements during the week, I think he said 290 vehicles in or out during the course of a week. But that's from memory, so bear with me.
Just point something out. So much for being there. Let's get out of here.
While you're looking for that,
Yeah, 290 vehicle trips in an average
There's no
week.
parking on Washington Street side of that building. There, said it.
Okay.
You guys do what you want.
Oh, let me correct the record. It's on the opposite side of the street on Washington Street. There is on-street parking, but we don't anticipate using it. 200, Table 1 shows the proposed apartments will generate 200 vehicle trips on an average weekday basis, 24-hour period. 34 in the AM, 28 in the PM week, yeah. There we are. Just trying to check through these things. Total vehicle movements and parking. Okay.
you were mentioning that you have, I guess, the non, parking spaces for the non-residents, which would be what? A property manager?
Yeah, we'll typically have a few spaces reserved for staff, so we'd have, folks can have a place where they can go. So for example, maintenance has a spot where they can park their truck, and if they need to go in and do some work in the property.
Okay, so if you've got 70 spaces and you have.
We
I
might
think
reserve two.
Two, okay, because you mentioned 3 or 4. That's
But
what-
nobody's there, we don't have any staff who's there permanently. So in other words, there'll be staff kind of coming and going, but it would be very unusual to have 3 staff there simultaneously for any reason. But again, even with 70 spots, we're going to have a ton of empty spots.
Even with, what about visitor spaces?
Yeah, we typically, we'll have some visitors during a day, but I would encourage you to go take a walk down Castle Street in the middle of the day, and you'll get a good sense of what the parking demand is for us on a typical day. Similarly, where our headquarters are at Stone Arch, if you look at Stone Arch Village Senior, where the Rotary meets on Thursdays, actually, that's probably as crowded as that parking lot ever gets, is Thursday mornings when Rotary's there, and there's still 15 spots available at any given time. So I'm quite confident that we're not going to have any issues with the lack of parking.
Okay. Did
So-
you have a question, Mr. Gorman?
No, it got answered, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Ashbrook Apartments on Key Road has 48 spaces for 24 units, which is the 2 spaces per unit. And there are 16 parking permits that are issued there right now. So there's 32 visitor spaces available. And we anticipate having more parking than we really need. And I realize that parking is an issue in downtown Keene, but residential parking at Keene Housing Properties, it just doesn't lend it, the population just doesn't lend itself to having 2 vehicles per single one-bedroom units. It's not what we've seen. So we ask you to consider a special exception to allow 70 spaces, so it's a major reduction within the spirit of the ordinance, because it's specifically prescribed in the ordinance to allow a reduction in certain circumstances if we meet those elements. I think we have.
So my understanding is that there is no on-street parking on Woodbury, is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
That's where that retaining wall is, and there's a walkway on the retaining wall, so there wouldn't be space there for on-street parking. And no, we don't anticipate needing it, though, based on the traffic study and the local study, which is the best data we think we could get, is to look at what's happening here in Keene at similar properties rather than this sort of extrapolated study from an engineer. But we have that too, though.
Okay, does anybody have questions? No? No, we all set? Is there anybody from the public who would like to speak either for or against the special exception? I think we wore everybody out.
Attrition.
Attrition. In that case, I will close the public hearing, and we can deliberate. I think the criteria are basically in the application. So the first one is whether the nature of the proposed application is consistent with the spirit and intent of the zoning regulations, this LDC and the city's comprehensive master plan, and complies with all applicable standards in this LDC for particular use, which strikes me as being a little strange, because why would we be here for special exception if it met everything? So could we have some comments, views on whether it's consistent? Let's look at this with the spirit intent of the zoning. Mr. Gorman?
Well, I think the spirit and the intent of the parking requirements within our zoning code is to prevent situations where there isn't adequate parking. And I think the applicant has made a pretty good case to say that there is adequate parking for this particular use and this particular project. And, you know, he brought plenty of merit to the table with the parking study, as well as his own data that he collects with those other properties. So I think that the application is consistent with not creating a situation where there's a lack of parking.
Anybody else? I would just comment to remind us that with a special exception, it's basically a permitted use, but you have to look at it closely in layman's terms. So it's not quite the standard of a variance.
Right.
Did you have a comment, Mr. Clark?
It looks like in the, their application, they were erring a bit on the side of making sure that they were within that permitted exception, so I'm fine with it.
The proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated so as not to endanger public health, safety, or welfare. Yes, Mr. Gorman?
Well, I think my major concern here could be if in a different scenario, could be that there were 90 units and 70 spots for 100-plus people to fight over. But I think given that they do issue permits, that does negate any of the potential mayhem or chaos that could occur of just having random parking spots that anyone could just have a free-for-all with. So given that that's not the situation here, I do think that there is no real, and I don't know if that would be public danger or safety, but there's really no opportunity for chaos. If parking permits are being issued and being used, then that's where it begins and that's where it ends, to me.
Yes, Mr. Welsh.
And I would just add that, to the extent that orderly exit and entry to the site and movement around the site is an issue of public safety and welfare. It seems like they've thought about that and put in a design that takes care of that.
And we can punt that issue to the planning board. 3, the proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated so as to be harmonious with the surrounding area and will not impede the development, use, and enjoyment of adjacent property. Mr. Gorman?
I just don't think that this location and layout of the property is such that it could spill over into adjacent properties, just by design, by the way it's all laid out and what the properties surrounding it are. If it does spill out anywhere, I could see it being on the on-street parking, which frankly is there for the taking. So if that does happen, then that's great. The on-street parking will get used and life will go on. So I don't think it will affect anyone's enjoyment or rightful peace. I just can't see that happening.
Anybody else? I know when I read this application, initially, I think that was my concern. If it turns out, I don't think there are going to be too many riotous midnight parties, but if it turns out that there's not enough parking on the site, you know, where are people going to go? Because Woodbury Street is not really conducive to on-street parking, even on the other side of it. Washington Street has half a dozen spaces on the opposite side, and, you know, I was concerned. And it appears from the recitations from the traffic study that it doesn't look like that's going to be an issue. And I suppose if it does become an issue, that's something that the city will have to address with the property owners. Anybody else? The proposed use will be of a character that does not produce noise, odors, glare, and/or vibration that affects the surrounding areas.
Thanks.
Mr. Welch?
I like this one because I'm trying to imagine noise, odor, glare, and vibrations happening from, but then I thought, well, maybe. And the nature of the design that they've presented to us, and again, this is planning board details, is one where most of this stuff's going to be contained between the two buildings if they get funded. And glare, people turning around with their headlights on, noise, things like that will be absorbed and kept, for the most part, away from the neighbors in the surrounding area.
Mr. Corbin?
I would just say that if noise and glare and all of that was going to be a problem with 70 spots, I think it would definitely be a problem with 120. So if there'd be a good argument for reducing noise and glare with fewer spots.
And I would suspect if there is a problem, as Mr. Welch said, it's going to be felt by the residents in the two buildings, not necessarily by the people in the neighborhood.
Yep.
The proposed use will not place an excessive burden on public improvements, facilities, services, or utilities. Yes, Mr. Clough.
They seem to be utilizing essentially existing curb cuts with slight adjustments. That's a pretty minimal change. Everything else is interior.
Yeah, it strikes me that everything that would come under this would be something that would be internal to the site and the responsibility of Keene Housing and not the city. 6, the proposed use will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any feature determined to be of significant natural, scenic, or historic importance. Yes.
I think they're saving the historic building, taking parts of it off that are non-historic, and I think they mentioned they're even saving an old tree. So, yeah, I think they're doing the best they can to preserve what's worth saving and using the rest of the space to the best it can be used. So, and that includes the parking plan.
Anybody else?
Some of these get to be a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, or not applicable, but we still have to do it, right? The proposed use will not create a traffic safety hazard or substantial increase in the levels of traffic congestion in the vicinity of the use. This was one that I had some concern with, and that was the reason for my question originally, whether or not there would be, any curb cuts on the Woodbury Street side. I do have some concerns because Washington Street can get pretty busy up there, especially with people deciding, oh, I'm not in the 30-mile-an-hour zone, when they really are, and they shoot off 50 towards the highway. So I can foresee some potential issues with traffic turning into and coming out on Washington Street. It's a planning board issue, but I think it's something that will need to be addressed by the planning board. Mr. Gorman.
Would just say, just specifically relative to number 7, I would go back to the same argument for the noise and glare. 70 cars will be a lot less congested than 120, so.
Right, but I think we had the 290 vehicle movements per 24 hours. I mean, that's dumping quite a bit of additional traffic in and out of that parcel. And admittedly, when it was a school, there was probably more, but that was a really long time ago.
Yeah, I agree that it's definitely more than it is now, because right now it's near zero. But I think to get that building anywhere near an appropriate use, you're going to have a sizable traffic impact. And I'm fairly confident that, one bedroom with a small amount of 2-bedroom apartments is probably about as minimal impact as you're going to get. If it's a school or whatever other uses could come into play, I think your traffic counts probably increase from where we're at now.
And then we have the 2 extra ones for parking. The specific use or site has such characteristics that the number of required parking spaces is too restrictive. So I guess that comes down to his 120 parking spaces too restrictive. Mr. Gorman?
Well, I think the case was made pretty adequately by the applicant that it is too restrictive because they don't have enough land to do it. So, when this board approved the units that we just approved, it's fairly impossible for them to put 120 spots in there. So I think it is too restrictive in this specific application.
Yeah, and I think the traffic study indicates that there's, and the statistics of Keene Housing itself have indicated that it is too restrictive because there may not be a need for as many spaces as the ordinance requires. And then last but not least, the requested reduction will not cause long-term parking problems for adjacent properties or anticipated future uses. Yes.
I think the future use will be 90 units unless someone comes in front of the board again to get a different use. So this whole problem would be tackled again if that ever does happen. So given that, and the data that was presented us, I don't think there will be any long-term parking problems for adjacent properties with this use, and I think any future use, the board will get another crack at it.
Yes.
I mean, I am impressed by the data that the applicant has presented about the use of parking at their other sites. But I'm also impressed that this gives them a pretty good in for using those other sites as excess parking if the need arises. That's a specific feature of this user.
Yeah, my only concern there is that the other properties are at a distance.
They are. They are.
So you would have to figure out something.
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought there, but I would just point out briefly, there's 45 one-bedroom units, 15 two-bedroom units, so cumulative number of bedrooms, we're not looking much past 70. It's 75. So I know that the zoning ordinance calls for 2 spots, but logic may prevail in saying that, well, if you've got 75 bedrooms, 70 spots is probably going to prove adequate, and that's further supported by the data that we've been given.
Anybody else? All right, well, I will entertain a motion on ZBA 23-08, 438 Washington Street. Mr. Gorman.
I move to approve special exception ZBA 2308.
I'll second.
Okay, Ms. Barku, do you need any more of the motion to be read into the record, or is just referencing that enough? Okay. So now we'll go down the laundry list. The nature of the proposed application is consistent with the spirit and intent of the zoning regulations. Those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. The proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated so as to not endanger the public health, safety, or welfare. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. The proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated so as to be harmonious with the surrounding area and will not impede the development, use, and enjoyment of adjacent property. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. The proposed use will be of a character that does not produce noise, odors, glare, and/or vibration that affects the surrounding area. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. The proposed use will not place an excessive burden on public improvements, facilities, services, or utilities. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. The proposed use will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any feature determined to be of significant natural, scenic, or historic importance. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. The proposed use will not create a traffic safety hazard or a substantial increase in the level of traffic congestion in the vicinity of the use. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. The specific use or site has such characteristics that the number of required parking spaces is too restrictive. All those in agreement? 4 in favor, none opposed. And the requested reduction will not cause long-term parking problems for adjacent properties or anticipated future uses. All those in favor? 4 in favor, none opposed. And so the special exception, ZBA 23-08, is passed, approved, stamped, whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Mr. Hopper?
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Really appreciate it.
You run a tight meeting getting through that agenda.
Now I gotta go find some money. That's right.
Hard part, find some money.
Yeah. Or do we? Oh, that's good, because I couldn't make the 20th, and I was like, trying to juggle. Now, pick up some other balls and juggle them. It's always something.
Do we have any new business?
Thanks so much for making that trip.
Not at this time, Mr. Chair.
Then we are adjourned. Good job, everybody. Especially.